Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time before smartphones, before socks, even before indoor plumbing, to a realm where gods squabbled like tired coworkers at a Monday meeting, and entire cities were built just to flatter egos the size of small mountains. You find yourself high atop Mount Olympus, nestled inside a palace made entirely of polished cloud marble and celestial drama. The air smells faintly of ozone, spilled nectar, and unattended hubris. Everything glows with that strange golden light that makes you question whether the sun is rising or if it's just Apollo's ego leaking through the curtains again. The halls, as usual, echo with the sound of thundering footsteps and occasional divine muttering. But something about this particular morning feels off. Still. Too still. You stretch slowly on your mildly uncomfortable, cloud-shaped sleeping bench. Because let's face it, gods don't prioritize lumbar support. And glance towards Zeus's wing of the palace, half expecting the usual chorus of thunder cracks and self-important declarations like, "I'm the sky," or "Whose lightning bolt is bigger now, mortals?" But instead, there's only silence. Not even a dramatic wind gust. Not even a crackle. Not even a startled nymph tripping over a celestial scroll. You shuffle forward cautiously, your bare feet making the faintest squelch sounds against the damp cumulonimbus flooring. And that's when you realize there is no lightning. There hasn't been a single boom, zap, or spark since you woke up, which in Zeus terms is like a rock star sleeping through their own concert. You find the main hall abandoned, a rare and unsettling sight in the divine calendar, which typically runs on a chaotic rotation of arguments, declarations, and wine-fueled prophecy jam sessions. Pillars shaped like overconfident eagles loom overhead, and the throne, his throne, is ominously vacant. The royal bolt rack, a long horizontal slot above the hearth, carved specifically for storing the King of Olympus's weapon of choice, is empty. Not just, oops, I left it in the bathroom, empty. But there is no trace this thing ever existed, empty. There is no faint glow, no residual crackle, no suspicious scorch marks. Only a subtle cold void, as if the mountain itself is trying to forget the lightning bolt was ever here at all. Now, you're not technically a god, more of a glorified observer with limited cloud-walking permissions and a toga that doesn't quite fit right around the shoulders. But even you can tell this is going to be a problem. Capital P. You pause, squint toward the eastern horizon, expecting at least a minor thunderstorm to kick in somewhere over Thessaly. But the skies are offensively clear. Birds chirp. A shepherd down below yawns and stretches. Somewhere, a mortal probably has the audacity to water their garden without fear of divine smiting. The universe is unbalanced. Just then, a soft whooshing sound distracts you, like silk being pulled through a harp string. And you turn to see Iris, the messenger goddess, gliding into the hallway, her pastel rainbow trailing lazily behind her, like a sleepy streamer. Her face is unusually pale for someone who usually radiates joy, like a living paint sample chart. And she's biting her lower lip, a habit she usually reserves for moments of true panic. Like when Hera finds a hair that's not hers on Zeus's favorite laurel wreath. "Did you hear it?" she whispers. though there's nothing to hear. Exactly. That's the problem. And she floats off, leaving behind a faint trail of glitter that settles on your nose and makes you sneeze. Somewhere, a butterfly dies. You decide to investigate. Not because you're particularly heroic, but because you've already committed to being awake. And breakfast isn't served until Apollo finishes his morning sun route. You pass by the Hall of Echoes, where lesser deities usually argue about seating arrangements, and slip quietly into the East Wing, where Zeus keeps his more personal artifacts. His beard combs, his gold-plated thunder sandals, and of course, his beloved lightning bolt, which he likes to polish himself while muttering ominous threats in ancient Proto-Greek. Except it's not there. Instead, lying awkwardly where the bolt should be is a small note written in handwriting that can only be described as god-tier messy, scrawled on parchment that smells faintly of grilled olives and desperation. The note reads, simply, "Don't freak out, probably temporary, back soon maybe." No name, no divine seal, just a lazy scribble and a bad feeling. You look around, no signs of struggle, no smoke, not even a feather out of place. And that's when it hits you. Someone didn't just misplace the lightning bolt. Someone stole it. Now, for context, Zeus's bolt isn't just a pointy stick with a light-up function. It's the literal symbol of cosmic order, divine power, and I-win energy. It's the alpha remote control of the entire pantheon. Without it, not only is Zeus vulnerable, but the chain of command starts to unravel faster than Apollo's lyre strings on a humid day. And what's worse, no one else has noticed yet. Historians still argue whether the lightning bolt had a consciousness of its own. Some scrolls suggest it once hummed lullabies when Zeus was cranky. Others claim it could strike automatically if someone said the word hubris too many times. But one thing is certain: the bolt never leaves Olympus. Not on its own, not without drama. You tiptoe, well, float-toe, toward the dining chamber, which is surprisingly still stocked with ambrosia pancakes and nectar tea, and spot a few minor gods nibbling absently, clearly oblivious to the growing crisis. Hestia is stirring a soup that smells like boiled hope. Demeter is reading the ingredient list on a pomegranate. No one is panicking. Yet. And that's when you hear it. The distant thud of a thunderous footstep, followed by another, then another, echoing up through the very bones of the mountain. You barely have time to grab a napkin before the massive double doors burst open and Zeus storms in. Robe disheveled, beard half-brushed, hair frizzing like a cheap wool carpet after a static shock. His eyes, usually glowing with controlled voltage, are wide with disbelief. One sandal is on backward. "Who took my bolt?" No one answers. Someone coughs. A small olive falls off a platter. You take a cautious step back as the air pressure in the room drops slightly, the way it always does before a storm. Except this time, there's no storm coming. Just an awkward, unbearable silence. Then, with an exaggerated sigh that could flatten a pine forest, Zeus slumps into his throne and mumbles something that sounds suspiciously like, "This never happened when Cronus was in charge." And just like that, Olympus has its first real mystery in centuries. Despite the brewing tension and Zeus's unmistakable flair for public meltdowns, breakfast continues on Olympus because, as everyone knows, even in the face of divine catastrophe, gods still need to eat. And nothing short of an asteroid strike or a full-scale Hydra invasion has ever managed to cancel a meal around here. You shuffle into the dining hall just as the nymphs are laying out platters of roasted ambrosia pears, golden barley buns, and that one type of cheese no one actually likes, but everyone pretends to appreciate, because Artemis once said it was ethically sourced. The long, shimmering table is half filled with deities in varying states of boredom, self-importance, and mild hangover. None of them seem to be aware that the king of the gods is moments away from calling a code cloud red. You take a seat near the edge, next to Hebe, who is slowly pouring nectar into tiny chalices like it's a competitive sport, and offering each guest exactly the same passive-aggressive smile she's used since the Bronze Age. Across the table, Apollo is fussing over his sun-polished lyre, checking the tuning with the intensity of someone avoiding eye contact at all costs, while Artemis inspects her fingernails as if hoping to find the meaning of life lodged under one of them. No one has dared to mention the missing lightning bolt. Not because they don't care, but because on Olympus, acknowledging a problem out loud is basically the same as volunteering to fix it. And no one here got tenure by solving things. You reach for a honeyed fig and try to act casual as Hermes breezes in, cloak askew, eyes darting in every direction, like a minor god caught trying to sneak a second breakfast. He flops into his chair with the grace of someone who's had 3 flights cancelled and just realized he forgot to turn off the stove back in Arcadia. With a dramatic sigh, he grabs a handful of grapes and mumbles something about tight security and someone leaving the palace door open again, which makes Demeter look up sharply from her porridge and squint suspiciously at her daughter Persephone, who's just arrived from the underworld and still has a faint smell of pomegranate dust clinging to her sandals. Meanwhile, the elephant in the room, or rather, the thunderbolt-shaped hole in the room, continues to loom larger until, finally, it's Hera who breaks the silence. Her tone as crisp as a winter breeze through a freshly ironed bedsheet. "Well," she says, smoothing her robes with slow precision, "this is what happens when certain gods don't put things back where they belong." Zeus, who has just stomped into the room again, in a new robe and even messier hair, snaps his head toward her, his eyebrows arching with that dangerous kind of marital recognition that suggests this will end with one of them sleeping on a cloud bench for the foreseeable future. "You're implying I misplaced it," he says, voice rising like storm surge, which I did not. "It was stolen." There's a difference. Hera doesn't flinch. She stirs her nectar with deliberate grace and responds without looking up. "Last time, you left it in the dry sauna. The time before that, it was wedged behind the laurel wreath stand. And who could forget the I thought it was a back-scratcher incident of last spring?" A few gods chuckle nervously. Dionysus actually snorts into his goblet and has to wipe nectar off his chin with the sleeve of his ivy-strewn tunic, muttering, "I like that one." Burn the whole chaise lounge You glance at Athena, who is already pulling out a scroll labeled Incidents Involving the Lightning Bolt, 5th edition, and appears to be cross-referencing footnotes with alarming efficiency. She doesn't say anything yet, but the glint in her eyes suggests she's already drafting a full strategic report, and is one passive-aggressive comment away from suggesting a formal committee. Historians still argue whether this breakfast meeting marked the exact moment divine trust finally cracked under the weight of celestial egos and a missing weapon-grade weather instrument. But the consensus remains. Once Hera starts citing examples, it's only a matter of time before someone blames Pandora again. In the meantime, the table descends into increasingly petty accusations and side comments. Ares insists it must have been someone weak and treacherous, which somehow translates to probably Apollo in his war-addled brain, while Apollo fires back that at least I don't need violence to validate my existence. A comment that causes Ares to bite through a peach pit in rage. Aphrodite sighs loudly and announces she hasn't even seen the bolt since the last equinox. And really, isn't this more about Zeus projecting his insecurity about aging? Meanwhile, Hestia quietly ladles another spoonful of soup and says absolutely nothing, her gaze fixed on the swirling broth, as if it might offer her a glimpse of a simpler universe where gods didn't lose their divine artillery between breakfast and brunch. You, still chewing your third barley bun, try to stay very still. Because if there's one thing you've learned about breakfast on Olympus, it's that any sudden movement during a group argument can result in a task delegation. And you're not trying to spend the afternoon sorting through the Thunderbolt insurance policies again. You once had to do that during the Great Cloud Storm of 87, and it took 17 scrolls, 5 mood swings, and 1 unfortunate incident with a greased Pegasus. Suddenly, everyone quiets. Not because of any divine intervention, but because of a single, ominous sound. The scrape of Zeus's chair as he slowly stands. He clears his throat, which echoes like rolling thunder, even in its subdued form, and then, with a tone equal parts kingly despair and bureaucratic panic, says, "We are convening a council." There's a collective groan. Hermes actually rests his forehead on the table, and someone at the far end mutters, "Not another council. We just finished the one about ambrosia expiration dates." But Zeus is resolute now, his voice regaining that familiar rhythm of cosmic declaration. No bolt means no storms. No storms mean no fear. No fear means no loyalty. And without loyalty, we are just very dramatic people in bed sheets. You want to object to the bedsheet remark, but decide this is not the hill to die on. Instead, you silently agree with Hermes' eye roll and begin preparing yourself mentally for the tedium of divine council procedures. The long speeches, the overuse of poetic metaphors, the absolutely endless scroll readings. Yet even as Zeus outlines his emergency plan, one which so far involves finger-pointing, heavy sighs, and the vague promise of swift retribution, you can't help but notice the unease simmering just beneath the golden surface of the palace. The nymphs are whispering. The muses have gone silent. The last time this many gods were in one place and not throwing olives at each other was during the Trojan War, And even that ended with a very large wooden horse and multiple lawsuits. Something is different this time. Something is missing. Not just the bolt itself, but the very feeling of power that usually hums in the air like static electricity clinging to silk robes. You glance again at Zeus, whose shoulders seem ever so slightly slumped, and realize that beneath all the shouting, the storm god is scared. Not of defeat, but of irrelevance. Because a king without his bolt is just a man with a beard and an unusually loud voice. And as the gods continue to bicker over who last saw the bolt, you can't shake the feeling that the answer is nowhere near this breakfast table. It's already out there, somewhere. And whoever has it probably doesn't even know how to aim it properly, which of course is worse, much worse. The council chamber, despite its soaring ceilings, echoing acoustics, and throne-like chairs that seem custom-designed to induce both awe and lower back pain, has never really been known for efficient decision-making. And as you shuffle in behind the line of squabbling gods, it quickly becomes apparent that this emergency summit will follow the proud Olympus tradition of much talking and very little resolution. The chairs, arranged in a semicircle, facing Zeus's unnecessarily elevated platform, creak with divine weight as each deity takes their spot. And the whole scene has the tense, performative energy of a family reunion, organized by someone who once turned their siblings into lizards during a disagreement about inheritance. Zeus, having now changed into his formal robe, which is really just the same robe but with more lightning embroidery and an extra shoulder clasp shaped like a lion chewing a cloud, stands with both arms raised, trying to silence the room with his usual thunderclap gesture. But nothing happens. No sparks, no rumbles, not even a flicker of intimidating static electricity, just the soft, mildly humiliating sound of his palms clapping together like an enthusiastic schoolteacher at a parent-teacher meeting. The silence that follows is more awkward than reverent. "Right," he mutters, adjusting his beard and coughing into his fist. As you may have noticed, the lightning bolt, the divine weapon of Olympus, the symbol of our rule, the instrument by which I maintain cosmic order and vaporize particularly annoying mortals, has been borrowed. Stolen, Hera corrects from her chair, which is draped in fresh roses and what appears to be subtle marital contempt. "Yes," Zeus growls, "stolen. And this theft constitutes not just an insult to me personally, but a threat to the entire hierarchy of the divine realm. We must act swiftly, decisively, and above all, loudly." There is a polite smattering of applause from the nymph delegation, who seem mostly there for the snacks, and then a long pause as Zeus looks expectantly around the room, waiting for someone to volunteer a plan, or at the very least, agree that this is a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Instead, Apollo raises a hand and says, "Maybe we should consider that this is the universe's way of telling you to take a break. You've been a bit spark-heavy lately. Some of us have noticed. Zeus's left eye twitches. Historians still argue whether Apollo genuinely intended this comment as helpful spiritual feedback, or if it was part of a long-running passive-aggressive feud about celestial playlist privileges. But either way, the damage is done. Ares immediately slams his fist on the arm of his chair and bellows, "Enough talk! Let me ride out now and crush every suspicious mortal village within a 200-mile radius. Someone must have seen something. Someone must be punished. Your solution to everything is mass destruction," mutters Athena without looking up from the thick parchment she's annotating. "Remember the goose incident? It had a weapon," Ares thunders, although most of Olympus still maintains the goose was just aggressively territorial. You watch as Hermes rolls his eyes so hard, you're afraid they might detach and orbit his head. "We don't even know if it was a mortal," he says, adjusting his winged sandals and flipping a golden drachma between his fingers with practiced nonchalance. "It could have been a titan, or a rogue demigod, or honestly, a gust of particularly ambitious wind." Iris says, "No one entered or exited Olympus in the last 24 hours. Chimes in Hecate, who's been sitting in the corner, spinning a ball of darkness between her fingers, like it's an anxious cat toy. So unless someone inside this mountain took it, we're dealing with an inside job." That suggestion sends a visible ripple through the room. Everyone immediately glances around, eyes narrowing, suspicions bubbling to the surface, faster than Dionysus's wine fountains during festival season. Even the muses, usually above such petty dramatics, exchange glances and begin whispering in increasingly dramatic iambic pentameter. Zeus pounds his fist on the lectern. "No one leaves Olympus," he declares, "until we know exactly who is responsible. No disguises, no journeys to the mortal realm, no long philosophical retreats. And absolutely no unauthorized thunder impersonations." At this, Hermes mutters something that sounds suspiciously like, "Guess I better cancel my afternoon cloud surfing class," and slouches deeper into his chair. It's around this time that Apollo, always the overachiever, stands with an exaggerated flourish and announces, "I have consulted the omens. The stars have whispered. The olive trees have rustled in the wind. I have a vision." Everyone groans. Even the clouds above the chamber dim slightly in protest. He closes his eyes and begins to speak in a low, trance-like voice, hands raised as if balancing invisible pomegranates. "I see a shadow, not tall but powerful, holding something sharp, or perhaps grilled. There is heat. There is laughter. Goat laughter." "Are you saying a goat stole the lightning bolt?" Athena asks, arching a single eyebrow so perfectly it deserves its own fresco. Apollo blinks. "No, I'm saying I saw goat laughter. Very different. Also, olives were involved." Zeus puts his face in both hands. The council devolves, inevitably, into a dozen side conversations and tangents. Dionysus proposes a toast to the bolt's memory, which he insists should be honored with 3 days of continuous partying and light interpretive dance. Poseidon, who arrived late because he got distracted by his reflection in a puddle, suggests searching the ocean floor, just in case it fell through the clouds. Artemis insists on organizing a silent hunt, though no one is quite sure how she plans to track a missing lightning bolt using deer prints. Hephaestus offers to build a replica bolt as a temporary stand-in, but then sheepishly admits it might explode if sneezed near. Meanwhile, you remain near the back, sipping lukewarm nectar and pretending not to notice how the conversation keeps spiraling away from actionable ideas and into metaphors about balance, fate, and whether lightning truly belongs to anyone. The phrase shared cosmic responsibility gets thrown around more than once. Someone brings up Prometheus. Everyone groans. You glance again at Zeus, who's now pacing, muttering to himself, and occasionally shooting dirty looks at a column as if it personally offended him. His fingers twitch, as though still expecting the familiar pulse of the bolt in his grip, the comfortable hum of power he's grown so dependent on for millennia. Without it, he looks smaller, somehow. Not physically, of course. He's still massive, still regal, still draped in enough fabric to upholster a temple. But emotionally, there's a slight sag to his posture, a hesitation in his gait, the kind of uncertainty that even immortals rarely let themselves feel. The meeting drags on, predictably, until it's interrupted by a flustered nymph who scurries in, eyes wide, cheeks flushed, and holding a slightly charred scroll. There's been a development, she says breathlessly, and every head turns. Even Dionysus pauses mid-sip. Even Ares stops flexing. She clears her throat and reads, "To the gods of Olympus, your bolt is safe, for now. I will return it when you prove you deserve it. Sincerely, a friend." There is a beat of silence. And then, "Is this a prank?" Hera snaps. "Sounds like something Hades would do," mutters Demeter, narrowing her eyes. "Or that trickster satyr from the wine cellar." Dionysus adds. "Or you," Athena says, pointing at Hermes, who is already halfway out of his chair in protest. Zeus, however, says nothing. He takes the scroll gently, staring at the singed edges, at the looping script, at the galling tone of "sincerely, a friend." Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he folds the scroll in half and says, "We're being tested." Everyone stares. "We are the gods," Zeus continues. "We do not beg. We do not plead. But we do investigate. Thoroughly. Beginning now." You sigh. Here we go again. By the time the gods finally leave the council chamber, trailing ambrosia crumbs, half-baked suspicions, and the lingering scent of divine frustration, the energy in Olympus has shifted from mildly bored chaos to tightly coiled paranoia, wrapped in passive-aggressive courtesy. Everyone is suddenly watching everyone else just a bit too closely, speaking just a bit too formally, and smiling in that uniquely divine way that says, "I might incinerate you later, but for now, let's pretend we're on the same team." You wander back toward the western wing of the palace, where the clouds hang lower and the breeze always smells faintly of lavender and ozone. Mostly because you want to avoid the inevitable outcome of this investigation. Finger-pointing, guilt-tripping, and most dangerous of all, a spousal theory presented with evidence. And of course, it doesn't take long. Hera, who has perfected the art of casually dropping rhetorical daggers while sipping tea, calls a private meeting with Zeus later that afternoon in the so-called Chamber of Unity. A circular room decorated with symbolic reliefs of harmony, compromise, and suspiciously one-sided wedding contracts. You trail behind discreetly, because let's face it, eavesdropping is practically encouraged here, and find a nice, moderately comfortable cloud bench to settle on just outside the chamber's entrance, from which you can hear muffled voices without needing to press your ear too obviously against the mist-softened wall. Inside, Hera's voice carries the unmistakable tone of someone who's had to explain the location of a sacred object far too many times. "I'm simply saying," she begins, "that perhaps if you didn't treat the bolt like an accessory for dramatic entrances, it wouldn't keep disappearing." Zeus scoffs, loud enough to jostle a few decorative urns. "You're implying this is my fault." Hera doesn't miss a beat. "I'm stating that you've misplaced it before. Frequently. It's not a leap of logic. You think I just left it somewhere? Again?" he says, his voice climbing with the wounded pride of someone who once tried to blame a missing thundercloud on too many feathers in the atmosphere. "I think," Hera replies calmly, "that if you can't even keep track of your ceremonial sandals without attaching a bell to them, it's within the realm of possibility that you forgot where you last held the single most important weapon in the cosmos." There's a long silence. I slept with it under my pillow. Another pause. "Zeus," Hera says, her voice now quieter and dangerously smooth. "You drool in your sleep." Historians still debate whether Hera truly believed Zeus's bolt had simply been eroded away by divine saliva, or whether she was merely weaponizing the moment to win a long-standing argument about nighttime protocols. But what's certain is that by the end of their not-so-private conversation, Zeus is muttering darkly to himself about disrespect and storm schedules, while Hera sweeps past you with the satisfaction of a goddess who's just planted seeds of doubt deep in her husband's weather-addled ego. You decide to head elsewhere, because if you stay much longer, you might be assigned to the Bolt Recovery Subcommittee, which is the Olympian equivalent of jury duty, but with more scrolls and an actual risk of spontaneous combustion. As you meander down the Hall of Echoes, a corridor lined with statues of past gods whispering secrets no one cares to hear anymore, you pass by Apollo's sunroom, where he's holding a dramatic one-man poetry slam titled Ode to the Lost Spark. You don't stop. You don't want to hear any more metaphors about twilight despair and the inner glow of faded power. Not today. Instead, you take the long route through the gallery of minor miracles, which includes such underwhelming divine achievements as the slightly self-replenishing loaf of bread and the never-melting ice cube only works in shade. Until you reach the Central Observatory, a mostly unused dome at the very top of Olympus, where a single enchanted telescope still points lazily at the mortal world far below. It's dusty. The velvet cushions are faded. The last recorded use of this room was when Athena briefly considered launching a lunar census project and gave up halfway through because the moon refused to fill out its divine paperwork. You sit in the observatory's window nook and stare out at the pale blue world below, so full of movement, so unaware that the very forces of weather, order, and supreme dramatic flair are currently missing their primary spark plug. Somewhere down there, mortals are probably building shrines, lighting fires, singing songs they hope will please Zeus enough to bless their crops or spare their goats. None of them know that their prayers are echoing into a throne room where the only response is a nervous cough and a slightly melted spoon. The thing is, no one quite knows what happens when Zeus goes too long without his bolt. There are old scrolls written in languages only 3 gods and 1 very drunk oracle can still read, that speak of a time when the sky itself cracked open, when storms came not from Olympus, but from within mortal hearts, when power wandered the earth without a host. But those are just stories. Probably, or maybe not, because for all his flaws, his vanity, his impulsiveness, his baffling refusal to write down where he puts things, Zeus is still the keystone of the Olympian structure, and his bolt is more than a weapon. It's a tether, a beacon, the thing that keeps the balance between divine chaos and mortal mundanity from tipping too far in either direction. Without it, you feel the shift. Not sudden, not dramatic, but like the moment when a perfectly stacked pile of grapes begins to lean just slightly too far to one side. Back in the main atrium, the gods are beginning to fracture into informal factions. Athena has started compiling a spreadsheet, on actual scrolls, of course, categorizing everyone's whereabouts during the missing bolt window. And she's already placed 3 question marks next to Hermes' name. Hermes, in retaliation, is trying to assemble a team of mortal investigators, citing outsider perspective and budget outsourcing. Though most of them are poets, and one may be a fishmonger with delusions of grandeur. Hera is now whispering regularly with Hestia, who never takes sides publicly, but always seems to have the final word on who's invited to the next feast. Poseidon is sulking because no one wants to check the ocean trenches, which he swears are perfectly reasonable bolt-hiding locations. And Dionysus is trying to turn the entire investigation into a wine-themed mystery game, with the working title, Cludite. Who spiked the thunder? No one is amused, but he's already written a musical number, and it's oddly catchy. But the most surprising shift comes from Zeus himself. After his not-so-fruitful talk with Hera, he grows quiet. Not in the explosive way that precedes dramatic outbursts, but in a way that feels, frankly, unsettling. He walks the halls alone. He stands for long moments at windows, watching the clouds drift without their usual electrical dance. He skips one breakfast entirely, which prompts half of Olympus to assume he's dying. And though he still growls occasionally at the scroll carriers and nymphs, there's a subtle difference in his stride, in the way he gazes at his empty bolt rack, as if some part of him is beginning to wonder, not who took it or how, but why someone would dare. Historians continue to debate whether this moment marked a rare glimpse of Zeus's introspection, or merely a temporary cloud-induced melancholy. But the shift was real, and it was noticed. Even Hermes stopped cracking jokes for an entire hour. That's practically historic. You, meanwhile, take the opportunity to quietly examine the bolt stand again. No burn marks, no scorch residue, not even a fingerprint. Just a single, faint circle of ash, like something very hot had rested there for a long time, and then vanished with careful, precise intention. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't clumsy. Whoever took the bolt knew what they were doing, and left nothing behind, except perhaps the silence. It would have been easier, simpler, cleaner, more fitting with the general rhythm of divine affairs. if Zeus had just declared war, cast a wide net of lightning across the sky, assuming, of course, he still had any to cast, and waited for the guilty party to panic, combust, or show up in tears, begging for forgiveness, with a slightly singed scroll in one hand and a half-melted thunderbolt in the other. That was how problems used to be handled. Swiftly, loudly, preferably with dramatic clouds rolling in behind a declaration. But now, with no bolt in hand and no credible culprit in sight, Olympus finds itself trapped in the most dangerous condition a pantheon can experience. Prolonged reflection. You find yourself trailing Zeus later that day through the Hall of Storms, a rarely visited wing of the palace where murals depicting his past glories line the corridor in unnaturally vivid hues. Battles with titans, victories over giants, even that awkward incident with the bronze automaton on Crete that no one likes to talk about anymore. He walks slowly, his sandals brushing across marble etched with bolts and storm clouds, stopping now and then to stare at a scene from his more electrifying past. But this time with a gaze less triumphant and more puzzled, as if he's trying to remember the feeling of holding the bolt, the weight of it, the slight buzzing warmth it gave off, and whether he ever truly appreciated it, or simply used it as a shortcut to be heard without needing to explain himself. You say nothing? You've learned by now that when a god is this quiet, this introspective, any interruption, no matter how gentle, might snap the fragile thread they're trying to follow through the fog of their own ego. And besides, it's not like you have any useful insight. You're not the one who left the universe's deadliest light stick unattended while asleep on a cushion made of compressed stratus. Instead, you observe as Zeus pauses before one particular mural, an exaggerated depiction of him hurling his bolt toward a titan the size of a mountain, all rippling clouds and fiery wrath, the kind of myth that was probably invented by a bard trying to win a free meal. He stares at it for a long moment, then mutters under his breath, "It always looked bigger in paintings," before moving on. Elsewhere in the palace, things are moving, but not necessarily forward. Athena, now firmly in her investigation general mode, has converted one of the lesser audience chambers into a strategic nerve center, which is really just a fancy way of saying she's filled it with scrolls, timelines, name charts, and a large diagram of Olympus, connected by red threads that no one dares touch. You stop by briefly and find her deep in conversation with Nemesis, who is reviewing a list of everyone Zeus has smited in the last century, and offering commentary on who might hold a grudge large enough to steal divine property. It's a long list. Hermes, as expected, is handling things differently. Rather than participate in formal inquiries or submit to Athena's rigorous questioning process, which now includes a psychometric aura scan and a questionnaire about divine attachment to portable symbols of power, he has decided to take the matter into his own winged hands by launching an independent investigation, complete with slogans, sidekick applications, and a completely unnecessary hat. You find him in one of the side courtyards, handing out flyers to a confused-looking dryad who thought she was attending a flower-arranging seminar. "You there?" he says, spotting you. "Have you seen anything unusual?" Perhaps a faint scorch trail, an odd humming noise, a suspiciously thunderbolt-shaped package being delivered to a satyr's hut. You shrug, and he frowns, adding, "Fine. If you remember anything, tell me. I've got a reward system, redeemable in drachmas, nectar coupons, or one free pun." You decline. Meanwhile, Dionysus, never one to waste an opportunity for theatrical excess, has taken the absence of the bold as a sign that discipline is no longer enforceable, and has started organizing daily festivities under the banner of liberation from lightning, a celebration of unsmited joy. The courtyard where he hosts these revelries is now permanently perfumed with fermented figs and regret. You pass by during one such gathering and see a group of nymphs playing catch with a glowing stick that looks suspiciously like a candelabra wrapped in mist, while Dionysus lounges on a vine-draped throne, sipping wine from a goblet shaped like a startled fish, and narrating the party's events in third person. But perhaps the strangest reaction comes from Poseidon, who has taken the bold's absence as a sign to reassert his own relevance. Without Zeus storming across the skies every afternoon, Poseidon's tides seem more dramatic, his waves crashing just a bit louder against the shores of mortal lands, as if he's trying to remind everyone that while the king of the gods is stuck on land with an identity crisis, the sea still moves, still roars, still answers to someone. He sends regular updates to Olympus in the form of bottled messages delivered via enchanted dolphins, each one containing poetic declarations like, "The ocean remembers. The sea does not lose its trident." No one replies. Still, the question remains. Who would dare steal the bolt, and why? Historians still argue whether the theft was an act of rebellion, a prank gone too far, or a divine test orchestrated by fate herself. But within Olympus, theories abound. Some blame the Titans, resurfacing from forgotten prisons to reclaim power. Others suspect rogue demigods, emboldened by tales of old prophecies and TikTok hero worship. A few whisper that it was an inside job, not by one of the major gods, but by someone overlooked, underestimated, quietly resentful. The thing about Olympus is that, for all its grandeur and immortality, it runs not unlike a poorly managed office with delusions of grandeur. Resentments linger, grievances fester, and a lot of minor deities go about their days feeling just a little too small, a little too faded behind the glow of thunder and lightning. Zeus, for his part, seems to be avoiding the throne room now. He wanders more, speaks less, occasionally drifts into the mortal observatory and stares down at the specks of humanity going about their business, tilling fields, lighting fires, praying to statues that, unbeknownst to them, are not currently listening. He doesn't speak when you find him there again, late that evening, but you hear him sigh. And for once, it's not the sigh of a god exasperated with the world's slowness or stupidity, but the sigh of someone quietly trying to understand what it means to have power one moment, and then not. And then, perhaps inevitably, someone knocks on the wrong door. You're passing by one of the upper corridors, a place typically reserved for retired muses and celestial archivists, when you hear a muffled crash, followed by a startled yelp and a string of muttered apologies. Turning the corner, you find Cleo, the muse of history, tangled in a stack of falling manuscripts, one of which bears the unmistakable scorch mark of the contact with divine energy. She looks up at you, flustered, cheeks pink, and quickly tries to hide the scroll behind her back. You both freeze. Neither of you speaks. Then she says, "It's not what it looks like," which of course means it's exactly what it looks like. You take a step closer and realize the scroll she's hiding isn't just old, it's forbidden. Marked with the symbol of Kronos, sealed with a wax impression, not seen since the last time someone accidentally summoned a minor apocalypse by misreading a recipe for eternal custard. The bolt, it seems, is just the tip of something much larger. And now you're in it, whether you want to be or not. Poseidon never liked walking on land. He says so often, loudly, to anyone within hearing range. Gods, nymphs, unfortunate birds. And every time he ventures above sea level for longer than 15 minutes, it becomes an ordeal of theatrical proportions. And yet on this particular day, perhaps out of guilt, pride, or the quiet realization that no one has invited him to a strategy meeting in over a week, Poseidon has arrived on Olympus in person to assist with the investigation, a decision that is immediately regretted by everyone present, including the clouds, the floor tiles, and the poor Pegasi in charge of air traffic control. You are standing near the entrance to the central courtyard when a rumbling tremor beneath your feet signals his arrival. Not from the sky like most dignified gods, but erupting up through a decorative fountain that was never intended to handle sudden columns of seawater, or a 12-foot-tall god wielding a trident carved from coral and passive aggression. The nymphs squeal. The fountain collapses. The gardenias will probably never recover. Poseidon steps out of the wreckage, dripping and scowling, his seaweed-laced beard tangled with what looks like a small shrimp, and announces with a grand gesture, "I have returned. The oceans have been searched. No bolt lies beneath the waves. And frankly, the implication that I would hide my brother's weapon in the Mariana Trench is deeply offensive." Aphrodite, reclining nearby with a glass of nectar and a disinterested expression, raises one eyebrow and says, "No one actually accused you." "To not be accused," Poseidon replies, "is often the most suspicious thing of all." And with that, he stomps off toward the council chamber, leaving wet footprints, mild indignation, and the unmistakable scent of brine behind him. You sigh and follow at a safe distance, already regretting your decision not to feign illness or a spontaneous pilgrimage to Delos. Inside, the gods have gathered once again, because if there is one thing immortals enjoy more than wine or poetry, it is holding meetings that accomplish absolutely nothing except reinforcing everyone's divine sense of self-importance. This time, however, the mood is less accusatory and more resigned, as if everyone has come to accept that the bolt is gone, the investigation is stalled, and there's nothing left to do but endure each other's company while pretending to contribute to the solution. Zeus is already seated, slouched in his throne, chin resting on one fist as he stares into the middle distance with the blank expression of someone trying to remember whether they turned off the stove before leaving for vacation. Hera sits beside him, quietly polishing the edge of a golden scroll case, not out of necessity, but as a thinly veiled way of avoiding eye contact. Athena, ever the overachiever, has added 2 new categories to her diagram of suspects: unknowable entities and suspiciously absent mythological concepts, and is currently debating whether the west wind counts as a person or an alibi. Poseidon enters with all the subtlety of a crashing wave and immediately declares, "The oceans are innocent, but I have reason to believe the clouds are hiding something." "The clouds?" Zeus echoes deadpan. "Yes," Poseidon says firmly, shaking droplets onto everyone nearby. "They've been unusually quiet, brooding, ominous. I don't like it." "That's because you're not used to clouds not being full of you," Hermes mutters from the back, earning a snort from Dionysus and a withering glare from Poseidon. Zeus sighs and gestures for silence. "Unless someone has new information, I suggest we adjourn and reconvene when we have something more substantial than atmospheric suspicion." But before anyone can argue, the doors burst open. Again, always dramatic, always with impeccable timing. And in floats Apollo, looking more radiant than usual, which is always unsettling, because it typically means he's had a vision or composed a new ballad. And neither of those things tends to end well for those within listening range. "I bring clarity," he announces, holding aloft a scroll that sparkles faintly at the edges, either from divine energy or excessive glitter ink. "The stars have spoken. The path is illuminated. The bold is not alone." There's a beat of silence. Apollo continues, rolling his eyes as if everyone else is slow. "It wasn't taken just to be taken. It's part of something, a sequence, a plan, possibly a dramatic reenactment. Hard to say. The stars are notoriously cryptic. But I've seen it. Seen a shadow carrying not 1, but 3 objects of power." Zeus sits up straighter. "3? Hera asks sharply. Apollo nods. "Yes, the bolt, a horn, and a mask." A murmur ripples through the chamber. Athena frowns. "The horn of Amalthea? The cornucopia?" "No," Apollo says. "This one looked older, cruder, less harvest, more herald. And the mask," he shudders dramatically, "was blank, completely featureless, just a white oval. No eyes, no mouth, just silence." Historians still argue whether Apollo's vision was genuinely divine insight or the product of fermented laurel berries. But in that moment, his words strike a chord. You see Zeus and Hera exchange a look, something that passes between them not as husband and wife, but as co-rulers who remember a time before Olympus stood in marble and song. A time when symbols held more weight than weapons. When masks were not disguises, but declarations. The chamber grows colder, though no wind blows. Poseidon clears his throat and says, "I've heard tales, whispered beneath waves, of a figure collecting relics. Relics from before our time, before his time." "Whose time?" Hermes asks, leaning forward. "The one who came before," Poseidon says. "The first spark, the first scream." No one speaks for a long moment. You shift uncomfortably. You've read the myths? Some of them, at least. The ones tucked away at the bottom of library scroll piles, written in looping, fading ink that refuses to stay still under the light. Stories of an entity that preceded gods and titans, that existed not as a being, but as a moment. a sudden awareness in the dark, a demand for more in the void. They called it by many names, most unpronounceable, all quickly forgotten. It was said to sleep beneath time, waiting for silence loud enough to wake it. And now silence reigns on Olympus. Zeus leans back, fingers steepled. So we're not just missing a bolt, we're missing a balance. And we're not the only ones watching. Hera adds, her voice low. The council ends without a clear resolution, but for the first time in days, there is motion. Uncertain, reluctant, but real. Investigations widen. Old relics are re-examined. Altars long untouched are brushed clean. Even Dionysus cancels a party, claiming spiritual realignment. Though more likely, it's because his wine amphorae started vibrating in rhythm with an unknown heartbeat. You, meanwhile, return to the observatory that night, hoping for peace, or at least silence not charged with menace. But when you peer through the divine telescope, scanning the mortal world for signs of disturbance, your gaze catches on something odd. On a hill outside a sleepy village, barely more than a crossroads, with a shrine and a goat pen, a figure stands, unmoving. It wears a cloak of feathers and smoke. Its face is smooth, pale, featureless, and in its hand, only faintly, only for a moment, you see the glint of something golden. A bolt. No, the bolt. You blink, it's gone, and you're no longer sure if you were ever meant to see it. By the following morning, Athena has done what Athena always does when faced with the possibility of abstract terror, cloaked in historical ambiguity and cosmological symbolism. She opens an inquiry, not with emotion or panic, but with a kind of relentless bureaucratic zeal that would make a Spartan tax collector seem underprepared. The chamber once used for hero auditions, long abandoned after the Minotaur musical debacle, has been hastily transformed into a formal tribunal of celestial oversight, now lined with scroll racks taller than demigods and filing systems organized by divine era, cross-indexed by grudge level, and annotated in 3 ancient dialects, known only to owls and very tired scribes. You arrive just in time to see a minor wind spirit trembling before the elevated bench where Athena sits, quill in hand, helmet polished to an almost surgical gleam, eyes narrowed in the kind of measured focus that makes even the most blameless entity feel like they've committed several tax violations and possibly a small war crime. The wind spirit, who was apparently on weather rotation near Crete when the bolt vanished, is trying to explain the difference between a natural atmospheric ripple and what he calls a deliberate silence, which, to be fair, sounds more poetic than useful, though Athena's brow furrows with interest at the phrasing. She makes a note. Behind her, a great tapestry is being slowly unfurled by 2 highly stressed muses. It depicts, with overdramatic embroidery, a timeline of major divine artifacts, complete with blinking enchanted thread that lights up whenever an object is currently in use. The bold section is, of course, dark. So is the section for the Horn of Echoes, a little-known relic once used by Pan to cause mass panic during the festival of wrongly timed revelations, and the section marked Mask of Silence, a relic so obscure that even Cleo had to dust off her memory archives to recall its provenance. Athena rises and addresses the chamber, her voice calm, steady, and entirely devoid of sympathy. We are not merely facing a theft, she says, but a convergence. Symbols stolen, tools of influence removed, a bolt, a horn, a mask, all primal in nature, all connected, not by use, but by intent. The room murmurs. Each of these items, she continues, represents a form of control, of weather, of fear, of identity. Their disappearance is not coincidence. It is choreography. Someone, something, is moving through our history, collecting keys to doors we thought sealed. She pauses, then adds, and I intend to find out who. At this point, the inquiry devolves into what can only be described as a divine administrative nightmare. Forms are distributed. Allegiance declarations are requested in triplicate. Everyone with a title or a sibling capable of minor illusion magic is summoned to appear for aura verification. You watch as Eos, the dawn goddess, is asked to explain her morning brightness locks, and a stunned Pegasus is required to list every delivery it's made this decade, including snacks. Meanwhile, Hermes attempts to dodge this tidal wave of paperwork by disguising himself as a decorative statue of himself, which works until one of the muses sneezes on him and his winged sandals twitch reflexively. Caught, he's dragged before Athena and promptly assigned to investigative logistics, a punishment which involves cross-referencing celestial courier records and personally verifying all satyr travel patterns in the last 2 lunar cycles. He complains loudly and continuously while chewing on a stylus. You, wisely, keep your head down and pretend to be a particularly helpful assistant archivist, nodding solemnly every time someone references auric trace anomalies or cosmic ripple differentials. Occasionally, you carry scrolls from one end of the chamber to another just to look busy, all while quietly listening, piecing together the clues being laid down like breadcrumbs dropped by paranoid gods in a forest they can no longer see the edges of. It is in one of these quieter moments, mid-afternoon, after Dionysus has been excused for spontaneous wine interference, and Ares has been scolded for trying to submit a list of suspects labeled simply everyone, that Athena calls forward a figure many had forgotten still lived on Olympus. Mnemosyne, the titaness of memory. She arrives slowly, gliding rather than walking, her form wrapped in pale blue veils that shimmer like dew at dawn, her eyes deep, distant, holding the tired weight of too many recollections. She has not spoken in council for centuries. Not because she is forbidden, but because she simply chooses not to, preferring to guard memory rather than debate it. Athena bows her head slightly, a rare gesture of respect, and says, "We ask not for prophecy, but for pattern. Has this happened before?" Mnemosyne says nothing at first. Then in a voice like slow-moving rivers, she replies, "Not like this. Not with these signs. But there was a time before the shaping of Olympus, before the titling of gods, when power flowed not from names, but from echoes." She lifts one hand, and a shimmer spreads across the floor, revealing an ancient scene. Not a memory of a moment, but a memory of a feeling. You sense chaos, vast and cold, swirling without language. Then 3 pulses of light, a crack of storm, a low wail, and a hollow mask descending. 3 relics, she says, born of imbalance, hidden, separated, guarded, not for use, but for delay. Delay what? Hera asks softly. The return of hunger, Mnemosyne says. You shiver, and not from the cold. Zeus, who has remained quiet during this entire inquiry, stands now, his hands clenched, the lines of age on his face deeper than usual. And what wakes it? Mnemosyne looks at him with the weariness of someone who has watched too many cycles, too many mistakes repeated in new costumes. Silence, dissonance, doubt. A long silence follows, broken only by the soft scratch of Athena's quill. Later, long after the inquiry adjourns, and most of the gods have retreated to their respective corners of Olympus to contemplate their own insignificance in the face of looming unknowable dread, you wander toward the edge of the mountain, drawn by something you can't quite name. Perhaps the wind, perhaps the pull of a question, half-formed in your mind, or perhaps just a desire to feel smaller, to look down at the mortal world below, where things are simpler, if only by necessity. And there, nestled between two crags of celestial stone, you find something you didn't expect to see. A scroll, not a formal scroll, no golden seal, no divine flourish, just a rolled piece of old papyrus tied with red twine. You pick it up, you untie it, and inside, scrawled in a hurried, slanted hand, is a message. The bolt is not yours. The horn was never theirs. The mask chooses silence over truth. You follow shadows, while the mouth is already open. Careful. No explanation, no location, no threat. Just a strange poem. A warning perhaps, or maybe just the ramblings of someone who has watched too much from too far away. You look up at the stars, and for a brief moment, you think one of them blinks. If Hermes were ever given the choice between participating in a structured investigation led by Athena, with its endless forms, moral high ground, and the emotional weight of destiny, and outsourcing the entire affair to mortals in exchange for questionable tavern gossip, poorly drawn maps, and a goat in a hat claiming to be a prophet, he would, without hesitation, choose the goat every time. Which is why, on this fine, overly bright morning, you find yourself standing in the shadow of Olympus's northern observation terrace, watching the god of messengers, mischief, and then misdirected enthusiasm prepare for what he calls an expedition of unprecedented importance. Though he's currently struggling to close his overpacked travel satchel, which appears to contain at least 3 loaves of barley bread, 12 scrolls, and 1 rubber chicken, for reasons unknown. Mortals, my friend, Hermes says, as he tightens the straps of his winged sandals, are uniquely talented in 2 things: creating messes and stumbling into solutions. Sometimes, both at once, which, let's be honest, is more entertaining than whatever Athena's doing with her color-coded parchment and her list of valid epistemologies. You raise an eyebrow as he gestures toward the clouds and continues. You and I, we're going into the real world, not the painted version Athena watches from her window. I've hired help, experts, mortals with instincts, mortals with faces that say, I know what a thunderbolt smells like. You're not convinced. But curiosity, as it often does in Olympus, outweighs reason. And before you can form a polite excuse, Hermes grabs your arm, mutters a phrase that translates roughly to expedited divine clearance, and the 2 of you are swept up in a vortex of wind, parchment, and mild nausea, spiraling down through the sky, past the upper clouds, past the veils of mist that buffer Olympus from the mundane world, and into the heat and dust of the mortal realm, you land ungracefully on the edge of a market square in a town so unremarkable it doesn't even have a proper name on half its maps, though the locals refer to it simply as Thistle's Turn, perhaps because it sits at the bend of a road known for growing thistles, or perhaps because someone named Thistle once turned there and nobody ever forgot it. Either way, it smells of goats, onions, and ambition. And the first thing you see upon arrival is a very loud bard arguing with a chicken about tempo. Hermes claps his hands. Perfect, we're blending in already. He leads you through the market with the ease of someone who's made a career of not paying for things, nodding at vendors, flipping the occasional coin, and occasionally muttering fake prophecies, just convincing enough to confuse a passing shepherd. Eventually, you reach the edge of the square, where a makeshift tent has been erected out of patched sailcloth and suspicious confidence. A wooden sign leans against the entrance, painted with an uneven hand. The truth snoopers, no haunting too small, no curse too mild. Also missing items. Inside the tent, two mortals sit at a table littered with broken quills, crumpled papers, and what appears to be a cracked crystal ball filled with marbles. One is a thin, bespectacled woman with ink-stained fingers and the permanent expression of someone about to say, "Technically, that's not how metaphysics works." The other is a burly man with a beard like an untrimmed hedge and eyes that shine with the misplaced confidence of a man who once wrestled a goose and called it a demon. Hermes beams. "This," he says proudly, "is Lysa and Berin. They've solved 3 thefts, 2 hauntings, and 1 extremely confusing bakery incident. And now, they're going to help us find a thunderbolt." Lisa peers at you through narrowed eyes. "Is it cursed?" "Worse," Hermes says. "It's meaningful." Berin grunts. "Do we get paid in coin or favor?" "Favor," Hermes replies, "which if you play your cards right, could be worth coin later. Or goats. Depends on inflation." You spend the next hour trying to explain the situation, carefully omitting certain divine details, though Lisa picks up on most of them anyway. She keeps detailed notes, asking pointed questions about the bolt's last known resonance signature, the typical behaviors of sentient relics, and whether anyone named F has a history of cryptic poetry and light arson. Baron, meanwhile, sharpens his sword on a whetstone that looks more ceremonial than practical, occasionally chiming in with questions like, "Could the bolt be inside someone?" And "What if it turned into a fish?" Despite your initial skepticism, they are surprisingly thorough. Lisa pulls out a divination grid shaped like a lopsided spider web and begins mapping energy flows through the region. Baron interviews the goat, who claims to have seen a flash of light in the hills, though it turns out the goat might have just fallen asleep near a campfire and dreamed the whole thing. Still, the pieces begin to form a picture. Strange lights in the woods, animals behaving oddly, and a merchant in the next village over who reportedly tried to trade a glowing stick for 10 jars of honey and a harp string. You travel there the next day. Lisa on a borrowed mule, Perrin walking ahead with the sword over one shoulder. Hermes levitating slightly above the road to avoid getting dust on his cloak. And you trailing behind, wondering how exactly this has become your life. The village, called Wren's Hollow, because of course it is, turns out to be a quiet place, all mossy roofs and suspiciously friendly grandmothers. But the merchant in question, a wiry man with too many rings and a very obvious wig, confirms that, yes, he did once see a glowing object. But no, he didn't trade it, because a good honey jar's worth more than a shiny twig. Thank you. He does, however, point you toward the person who did end up with the item. A traveling performer named Callies, who left town 2 days ago, headed toward the coast, carrying with her a lute, a puppet shaped like a lightning bolt, and reportedly a mask she didn't have before. Your blood runs cold. Hermes raises an eyebrow. She's either part of it, he says, or she's seen it. And just like that, the chase begins. Over the next few days, you follow rumors and footprints, collecting scraps of stories and confused testimonies, like breadcrumbs. A child says Callie sang a song about the face with no face. A guard remembers her eyes, glowing faintly under moonlight. A cat won't stop hissing at her name. At one point, you find a small roadside shrine, where someone, perhaps her, perhaps someone watching her, has carved 3 symbols into the wood. A bolt, a horn, a blank circle. The signs are aligning. Something is happening, but no one knows what it means yet. Back in Olympus, you suspect Athena has already sensed the shift. Perhaps noticed the sudden tension in the wind, the unnatural quiet between prayer offerings. The balance is changing. A pattern is emerging, and somewhere out there, Callies walks, either carrying a stolen relic, wearing a cursed disguise, or channeling something far older than either of those. The only thing you know for certain is that she's not acting alone. The problem with Ares, well, one of the many problems with Ares, is that subtlety has never been part of his divine toolkit. And nuance is a foreign language he refuses to learn on principle. So when the bolt remains missing, the skies remain quiet, and the investigation continues to rely heavily on scrolls, whisper networks, and distant visions of featureless masks. Ares does the only thing he's truly good at. He demands someone be punched, preferably repeatedly, and volunteers himself for the task, with the kind of glee that makes even the warhorses nervous. You find him pacing the training courtyard of Olympus, shirtless despite the weather, muscles tensed as if he's bracing for an attack that only exists in his head, which, to be fair, is probably filled with more battle cries than thoughts. He swings a bronze hammer at a practice dummy, shaped like a titan, sending it flying across the courtyard, where it knocks over a stack of shields and startles a nearby group of cupbearers into spilling half a vat of nectar. Enough talking, Ares mutters, not to you specifically, but to the wind, or the concept of diplomacy. Every day without thunder is a day of weakness. Mortals are getting bold. I can feel it, praying less, fighting more. Someone knows who took the bolt, and they need to be persuaded. You consider reminding him that intimidation hasn't exactly worked on mysterious cosmic forces in the past, but decide it's not worth the effort, especially given the way he's now flexing at a tree. Still, Despite the theatrics, there's a seed of truth in what he says. The longer the bolt remains missing, the more the world below seems to tremble. Not in fear, as it once did, when storms rolled across the sky like Zeus's exclamation points, but in anticipation, like a held breath, or a drumbeat getting faster without anyone keeping tempo. In Athens, a temple priest reports that the sacred fire won't stay lit. In Thebes, a statue of Hera weeps salt water for 3 nights straight. In an island village no one can quite name, children dream of a sky with no stars and wake with songs on their lips. They don't remember learning. Strange, simple things, easily dismissed when taken alone, but when connected, they form a constellation of unease that even Ares can't ignore, which is why, for the first time in centuries, he calls a meeting, not of gods, not of strategists, but of fighters. It takes place in the lower fields of Olympus, where mist rolls in heavy from the east, and the ground is scarred from ages of training, battle reenactments, and that one ill-fated chariot demolition derby. Ares has summoned every warrior spirit, every battle-hardened shade from Elysium willing to return, and even a few mortals still alive but oddly available. The field is filled with clanking armor, sharpening blades, and conversations that all seem to begin with "back in my day" and end with something exploding. You watch from a distance as Ares paces in front of them, delivering a speech that, while heavy on volume and short on actual detail, somehow manages to rally them into unified agreement. Something is wrong. Someone is hiding something, and they're going to flush it out the only way they know how. Through noise, movement, and a complete disregard for nuance. Warfare, Ares bellows, is the universe's oldest truth. Older than Zeus's beard, older than Athena's smugness, older than Apollo's metaphors. It reveals, it unmasks, it forces the enemy to show themselves. So, if the enemy is hiding, if they wear silence like a cloak, then we shout and we strike, and we keep striking until silence breaks. The warriors cheer. Somewhere nearby, a tree bursts into flame out of sheer peer pressure. Now, whether Ares truly believes this will uncover the bolt, or simply wants to start a fight because it's been too long since anyone bled meaningfully, no one can say. Historians later referred to this episode as the March of Rhetorical Steel, an event that produced surprisingly few casualties, but did lead to several sculptors quitting in protest due to excessive demand for heroic poses. As Ares prepares to descend into the mortal world with his entourage of over-armed ghosts, a new complication emerges. One that arrives not with fire or thunder, but with a whisper. You're in the scriptorium, reviewing scrolls for Athena, who has now compiled a suspect list that includes 5 gods, 12 mortals, 1 chimera, and a strongly worded metaphor, when a raven lands on the windowsill. Not unusual, except this raven is blindfolded with silver thread, which is either a bold fashion statement or a symbol of divine secrecy. It drops a folded note, waits exactly 3 seconds, then vanishes in a puff of shadow that smells faintly of myrrh and unfinished business. The note contains only 1 line: "Do not let him fight. That's what it wants." No signature, no seal, but the handwriting is familiar. Tight, slanted, usually only seen on the margins of ancient scrolls that smell like mildew and stubbornness. You show the note to Athena. She frowns, reads it 3 times, then burns it with a snap of her fingers. Hades, she says. You blink. Hades, he sent the raven. No, she replies. That's his parchment. That's his ink. But he didn't send the raven, which means someone in his realm did. Someone he trusts. You hesitate before asking, so, do we stop Ares? Athena rubs her temples. You don't stop Ares, you redirect him, which is how 2 hours later, you find yourself standing beside a furious god of war, being told he's not allowed to attack anything unless he can fill out a field operations request form and submit a target location within the jurisdiction of the Olympus Defense Accord. He doesn't take it well. There's shouting, a shield gets bent into a bowl, a goat faints. Eventually, he storms off to find something to wrestle. You, still shaken by the note and the implications behind it, retreat to the Temple of Echoes, a long-forgotten alcove near the edge of Olympus, where voices from the past still linger, trapped in the walls, murmuring pieces of half-remembered truths. It's not often visited, too quiet, too strange, but today, you feel drawn to it. And as you stand there, letting the whispers wash over you, a single word repeats over and over, layered in dozens of voices, young and old, male and female, divine and mortal. Listen, then silence, then again, listen, and then something else, a name, Callis. You freeze. It's the first time Olympus has spoken her name. The echo fades. And you know, deep in your bones, that everything is converging. The bolt, the horn, the mask, the silence, the hunger, the girl. And now even the war god feels it. Which means something terrible is about to wake. You wake to an unusual stillness. Not the kind that settles over Olympus during those rare moments of peace, when no one is hurling accusations or amphorae, but a deeper, heavier quiet, like the hush before a storm that has forgotten it's supposed to arrive. The clouds, normally restless and shifting, seem frozen in place, suspended mid-swirl as though caught by an invisible hand. The air is thick, not with heat or moisture, but with hesitation. And as you rise from your cloud-woven bed, you realize that something in the rhythm of the mountain has shifted ever so slightly offbeat, like a lyre string drawn too tight. Outside, the corridors are nearly empty, which is always a bad sign. Gods and demigods tend to occupy space loudly, leaving behind trails of perfume, thunder, feathers, or complaints. But today, that you pass beneath marble arches and over inlaid mosaics depicting long-forgotten victories, and no footsteps echo behind you. Even the nymphs are absent, their usual chatter and soft laughter replaced by silence that presses in like mist. It isn't until you reach the eastern balcony that you see the first sign of motion. Athena, standing alone, her spear grounded beside her, staring out over the mortal world with a gaze that doesn't blink. You approach quietly, slowly, but she doesn't turn. They're watching her now, she says, voice low, almost lost to the wind. Not just us, not just the ones who remember the old stories. Even the mortals are beginning to notice. They can't name it yet, but they feel it. You follow her gaze to the valley below, where the mortal village of Thistle's Turn is waking to a sky that refuses to change color, trapped between twilight and something else, something less certain. The sun hovers unnaturally low, as if unsure whether to rise or retreat, and the shadows on the ground are just a little too long for the hour. Somewhere in that stretched moment, somewhere between stables and shrines, walks a girl with a puppet, a lute, and a mask. Athena's grip tightens on her spear. She's moving west, she continues, toward the old boundary stones, the ones we never marked on maps, because we never wanted to acknowledge they existed. You remember those places? Whispered about in lessons, referred to only obliquely in scroll margins. Places where the fabric of Olympus thins, where the borders between myth and memory blur, where the world was once stitched shut with gold and silence, and the last breath of a dying star. They're not boundaries, Athena adds. They're locks, and someone's gathering the keys. A beat of silence stretches between you. Then she turns, finally meeting your eyes. Zeus needs to know. You nod and head toward the throne room, where you suspect he's been brooding in increasingly poetic metaphors, wrestling not just with the loss of the bolt, but with the loss of definition itself. When you arrive, you find him sitting on the steps below his throne, not above it, hunched over an old scroll you don't recognize. It's faded, brittle, and covered in writing so old it predates even the Olympian alphabet. She's opening the third way, he says without looking up. You frown. The what? The third way, he repeats. Not Olympus, not Tartarus. The in-between, the place where stories go when they're forgotten but not gone. Where the first lies were told, where power doesn't obey shape or name. He sighs and finally rolls up the scroll, placing it gently on the floor, as though afraid it might vanish. The bolt, he says, was always a symbol. A scepter, yes. A weapon, yes, but also a seal. It was one of the things anchoring this realm in certainty. Take it away, and questions begin to leak through the cracks. What is a god? Who gives us that title? What happens when mortals stop whispering our names before sleep? You don't answer. You can't. Because in your mind, you still see the figure from the telescope's lens. The mask, the cloak of feathers, the momentary flash of stolen gold. She's being guided, Zeus continues, rising slowly. The weight of years, or perhaps the weight of legacy, settling on his shoulders. Whether she knows it or not, she's part of something older than any of us. And I fear it does not end with her. Behind him, the storm altar remains dark. No bolts, no hum. Just the empty rack, where once the most powerful object in the heavens rested like a sleeping lion. You wonder if it remembers what it meant to be held. That evening, Olympus convenes again. Not for a council, but for something older, something stranger, something none of them have done in a very long time. A gathering without words. A silent vigil. The gods, for all their noise and color, have long known the power of stillness. And tonight, they stand shoulder to shoulder in the Hall of Echoes, surrounding a pool of starlit water, and simply listen. No speeches, no accusations, only breath and memory. In the center of the pool, an image begins to shimmer. Callis. She walks now through a dry field, the grass brittle beneath her feet, each step silent, deliberate, as if she walks not across earth, but across the spine of a great sleeping thing. Her puppet hangs loosely at her side. The lute is slung across her back. The mask is still not on her face, but you see the way she touches it now and then, as if checking it's still there, as if unsure whether she's supposed to wear it yet or if it's still too soon. Beside her, though no one else seems to see it, walks a figure made of absence, less a person and more a suggestion, a cut in the world's fabric shaped like a companion. It leaves no prints, casts no shadow, but it is there. The gods watch in silence, and then the image fades. No one speaks for a long time. Eventually, Dionysus clears his throat. So, we're not smiting her then? Athena throws a laurel leaf at his head. Later, long after the vigil disperses and the gods return to their chambers, you find yourself unable to sleep. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. Because deep down, you've seen this pattern before. Not in action, but in structure. In lullabies, half remembered. In stories told by campfires. In dreams you forgot upon waking. A bolt stolen, a mask found, a journey walked in silence. These are not random events. They are pieces of an old play being performed once more by new actors under a new sky. The only question is whether the ending will be the same. As you stand at the edge of Olympus, staring down at the world that still spins beneath its gathering shadows, you feel a shift in the wind. A ripple, soft and sudden. You turn, and in the clouds behind you, a whisper. You're part of it now. You don't know who said it, or if it was said at all, but the silence that follows feels like a beginning. You don't remember deciding to follow her. Not in the conscious, planned-out sense of weighing your options and writing a neat list of pros and cons on the back of a divine napkin. But somehow, by the time dawn smudges its hesitant light across the horizon and the clouds hanging below Olympus begin to shift from silvery indigo to a reluctant gold, your feet have already carried you to the outermost edge of the divine threshold. The place where the firmament starts to fray, where myth and mortal soil meet not with fanfare, but with the quiet rustle of possibility. And from there, with only a breeze at your back and a borrowed map that is more memory than ink, you begin to descend. The path is not marked, at least not in any way that would be useful to a traveler of sound mind and moderate skepticism. It does not twist or slope or wind as a proper road might, but folds itself downward, like an idea being unrolled one careful syllable at a time. A kind of narrative slope that feels less like travel and more like falling into a story someone else began writing long ago. And as you walk, you notice the air changing. Not cooler, not warmer, but thinner, like the kind of air that holds its breath. The kind of air that waits. By midday, you have passed through 2 empty hamlets and a ruined shrine that smells faintly of cedar and abandonment. Though none of them offer clues, only silence, and in one case, a half-burnt offering of grain and honey left atop a cracked altar with no name. You stop for water near a grove where the trees seem to lean inward slightly. Not maliciously, but in that way that implies they are listening to something you can't quite hear. And when you speak aloud, just a simple hello Your voice seems to disappear mid-sentence, as though the space itself is too full to hold more words. You continue. She's not far. You can feel it. Not in any magical, glowing thread of fate way, but in the way the wind sometimes changes direction just after you pass through it. In the way animals go still when you approach. In the way the world feels arranged, as though someone or something is setting the stage just ahead of your steps. Near sunset, you find a child sitting by the road, alone. You hesitate. This is not the kind of road where children should be. Certainly not unattended, certainly not humming to themselves as though nothing in the world has shifted. And yet here he is, legs crossed, plucking petals from a flower you don't recognize. And when he looks up at you, his eyes are the soft gray of storm clouds that haven't quite decided if they want to rain. She passed here yesterday, he says, before you ask. She didn't stop. You crouch beside him. She wore a mask? He nods. Did she say anything? No, he says, but her shadow whispered. You pause. What did it say? The boy thinks for a moment, tilting his head like a bird, considering the meaning of a wind gust. And then, with the casual detachment of children, too young to fear what they understand, he says, it said, the door is opening. You thank him, though he's already gone back to his petals. And you leave without looking back, because something in you suspects that if you were to turn around, you might find the boy no longer there, or perhaps never there to begin with. Night falls. You sleep briefly, uneasily, wrapped in a borrowed cloak, beneath a sky that refuses to hold its stars in place. Constellations shift when you're not looking, and more than once, you wake to the feeling of being watched by something very far away and very old. By morning, you reach the forest. It has no name. Forests like this rarely do. It is not the dark that makes it foreboding, nor the silence, but rather the sensation that every tree, every root, every rustle of branch has been rehearsed, as though the forest has been waiting for this moment to unfold for a very, very long time. You find her just before noon, at the clearing's edge, alone, still. Callies, she stands with her back to you, watching a stream so still it might be glass. The mask held loosely in one hand, the puppet dangling from her belt, the lute slung across her back, like a story no one's told yet. She doesn't turn when you approach. She doesn't speak. You stop several paces away. Callies, you say gently. Still nothing. Do you know what you're carrying? At that, she tilts her head slightly. Not quite a nod, not quite a denial, and finally speaks. Her voice quieter than the stream, rougher than you expect. I didn't at first. You step closer. Do you now? She exhales, slowly, and then lifts the mask, turning it over in her hands. It's not just a disguise, she says. It's a doorway, a voice that doesn't speak with words. It's been guiding me, not telling me where to go, but making it obvious where I can't stay. You nod, she continues. The bolt was easy. It called to me. It didn't fight, it just wanted to be somewhere else. You feel a chill crawl up your spine. And the horn? I don't have the horn, she says, and looks at you for the first time. Her eyes are not glowing. They are not empty, but they're old in a way that makes you question everything you know about time. I'm not collecting them, she adds, as if reading your thoughts. I'm just being used. You step forward, slowly. Then who's using you? And her answer is so quiet, you almost miss it. The question isn't who. She holds up the mask. The question is what? There's a long silence between you then, thicker than air, thicker than thought. And in that silence, you feel the forest lean in, the stream still further. The very bones of the world pause to listen, and somewhere, on Olympus, in Tartarus, or perhaps in the unspoken space between, a door creaks open, just slightly, just enough. Callies lowers the mask, and in that moment, the world doesn't change, but it begins to remember how. By the time you return to Olympus, tired, wind-scuffed, and carrying more questions than answers, the clouds have shifted their positions just enough to suggest the mountain itself has been leaning in, listening, perhaps not entirely to you, but to the arc of events trailing like mist behind your every step. You climb the stairs slowly, each marble tread feeling heavier than the last. Not from fatigue alone, but from the weight of what you've seen, and more disquieting still, the feeling that you've only just glimpsed the edge of something vast and unresolved. A narrative unfurling beneath the sheen of myth, like a long-sleeping leviathan beginning to stir. At the gate, Iris meets you with a nod, too solemn for her usual bright demeanor, and she wordlessly guides you through the eastern colonnade, past the chamber of mirrors that reflect not faces, but fates, and into Athena's strategy hall, which now resembles less a room of order and more a battlefield of scrolls, maps, celestial blueprints, and half-drained goblets of focus nectar. Athena doesn't look up at first. She's bent over a sheet of parchment, so large it has to be weighted down, with stone busts of herself from various artistic periods. But as you draw near, she lifts her gaze, and for the first time since this began, you see a flicker of something behind her storm-colored eyes that looks less like certainty and more like fear, carefully caged behind the bars of logic. You saw her, she says, not a question. You nod. She has the mask. Yes? Athena folds her arms, temples tense. And she's beginning to understand it? More than we hoped, you reply. Less than she needs to. She exhales, a slow, measured release that seems to rattle the golden lampchains overhead. And the bolt? You hesitate. She still carries it, but she doesn't wield it. She treats it like it doesn't belong to her, like it's a weight, not a weapon. Athena nods once and then mutters, "That may be the only thing keeping the mountain from cracking open." You take a cautious step forward, lowering your voice. "She's not our enemy." "No," Athena replies, "but neither is she our ally." And then more softly, "Not yet." You glance at the sprawling chart laid out before her, a mess of intersecting timelines, forgotten myths, and relics thought lost to the earliest echoes of language. In one quadrant, you see the faint outline of 3 symbols drawn in ash: a bolt, a horn, and the mask, their lines flickering under Athena's enchantment, like firelight caught in ink. Above them, written in a language older than Olympus itself, the phrase, "When the 3 are named, the 4th awakens." You point to it. "Do we know what the 4th is?" Athena's silence stretches longer than is comfortable. Then she says, "Not exactly." You wait. Eventually she sighs, and gestures you toward a side alcove, a narrow corridor hidden behind a bookcase that slides aside only when one speaks the name of the moon in reverse. You've never been back here. Few have. The air is older, thinner, and the walls are inscribed with symbols that squirm at the edges of your vision if you look at them too long. At the end of the hall is a pedestal, and on that pedestal rests a single object. A flat stone slate carved with 4 circles in descending size. 3 are filled. 1 remains hollow. This was left by Mnemosyne, Athena says quietly. Before she withdrew, before she stopped speaking, she said it was not a prophecy, not a warning, but a remembrance of what has not yet happened. You blink. A memory of the future? Athena shrugs faintly. Something like that? You stare at the 4th circle. You think Callis is awakening it. I think, Athena says, something is awakening through her. And if the 4th truly is what the old texts imply, if it is the unshaped, the first hunger, the absence that existed before naming, then the bolt, the horn, and the mask are not just keys. They are bait. You swallow hard. Then you ask the question that's been rattling in your chest since the forest. So what do we do? Athena doesn't answer at first. She simply looks at you. And in that look is the full weight of her role. Not the strategist, not the warrior, but the one who must always choose the least damaging failure. We wait, she says at last. You don't like that answer. Apparently, neither does Hermes. He bursts into the room a moment later, winded, unusually serious, and holding a crumpled scroll in one hand that's been folded and refolded so many times, it looks like it barely survived its own message. Message from the mortal coast, he says. Callis was seen near the mouth of the Selene River. She played a song. No words, just a melody. Athena frowns. And Hermes shrugs, then adds, the river flowed backward for 3 minutes. That gets her attention. She unrolls a map and traces a line with one finger, muttering to herself in calculations too ancient for you to follow. Then she stops. She's tracing a pattern, not just a path. A shape. Hermes leans over. A summoning circle. No, Athena murmurs. Worse, a memory loop. You stare. What does that mean? She's moving through stories, Athena says. Old ones. Places where myth still leaks into the world. She's weaving them together. And the more she moves, the stronger the stitch becomes. Eventually, the boundary between telling a story and becoming it begins to dissolve. Hermes whistles. So, we're living in a myth that's being rewritten in real time? Athena nods. You ask, what happens when the loop closes? She looks at you, and then she says very quietly, it opens. That night, back in your quarters, you cannot sleep. You lie beneath a ceiling painted with stars that no longer match the sky outside, listening to the soft hum of Olympus, trying to hold itself together. Dreams do not come. Or rather, what comes are not dreams, but memories that do not belong to you. Dusty images of a young woman in robes too large for her frame, standing before an altar that bleeds light, whispering a name with no vowels. You wake with the word on your tongue, but lose it before it can reach your lips. You rise and pace the halls, finding yourself drawn again to the observatory dome, where Zeus stands alone, his back to you, his silhouette barely outlined against the shimmer of distant galaxies. I remember when the stars held still, he says without turning, when the constellations obeyed us, when the heavens mirrored Olympus instead of questioning it. You stand beside him. He looks tired. He looks small. He looks real. She's not doing this to spite us, he says. She's not defiant. She's simply moving, as if she's always known where she was going, even if we didn't. You nod. Zeus places a hand on the railing, and his fingers tremble. There are older things than gods, he says. Things we chose to forget. Things that asked questions instead of demanding worship. And then he adds, almost to himself, the bull didn't choose her because she's powerful. It chose her because she listens. You don't respond. Because somehow, deep down, you already know he's right. By the 13th day since the lightning bolt vanished, Olympus is no longer pretending everything is under control. No longer clinging to the frayed remnants of routine or the hollow shell of divine infallibility. No longer trying to drown uncertainty beneath endless counsels or perfectly crafted metaphors. Because something ancient is moving. Something that does not respond to titles or heralds or even the threat of storm. And the gods, for all their centuries of certainty, have begun to realize they are not standing at the center of the story this time, but rather circling the edges of a narrative that was already spinning long before they named the sky. You notice it first in the birds, the starlings that once flitted above Olympus in synchronized swirls have vanished entirely, and the few that remain do not fly in flocks anymore, but in disoriented spirals, crashing into marble walls and vanishing through gaps that weren't there the day before. The phoenix, nesting in the high clouds, has stopped its cycle of combustion and rebirth, as if some quiet intuition told it that this is not a time for burning, but for waiting. Even Hermes' favorite falcon, sharp-eyed, loyal, and usually immune to divine temper tantrums, refuses to land anywhere near the throne room. Then come the shadows. Not dramatic, not theatrical, not some overplayed omen with black smoke and whispering voices, but subtle, natural shadows that begin behaving unnaturally, bending in directions they shouldn't, remaining even when the source of light disappears, clinging to the edges of things as if reluctant to move on. You walk through the hall of winds and see your reflection in a polished pillar, but the shadow behind it doesn't match your movement. It lags, or tilts, or simply stands still when you walk away. And worst of all, perhaps, are the prayers, because they are still coming in droves, but they no longer sound like pleas or songs or gratitude wrapped in incense smoke. They sound like questions, urgent, repetitive, frightened. Mortals kneel before statues with their hands trembling and ask, "What is happening? And where is the storm? And why does the moon blink? And why are the stories changing?" And none of the gods, not even those who make a show of listening, can answer. It is against this backdrop of unraveling that Hera finally loses patience. Not the sharp-tongued, well-tailored irritation she typically wears, like a brooch, but the full, sovereign weight of her fury, the kind that cracks amphorae with a glance and makes lesser gods wilt beneath their laurel wreaths. You are summoned to the outer court just in time to see her stand before the mirror lake pool, a ceremonial site used only during moments of formal declaration. And when she speaks, her voice is not raised, but lowered. And somehow, that makes the silence that follows even more complete. If this girl, Hera says, is a thread being pulled through the fabric of our world, then it is time we cut it before the cloth unravels. Zeus does not interrupt, nor does Athena, because the unspoken truth, the one that has begun to seep through even the most fortified minds, is that none of them are sure cutting the thread would do anything other than make the unraveling worse. You step forward, not out of bravery, but because the alternative is letting the silence agree with her. She's not doing this to us, you say. She's not weaving. She's being woven. Hera turns to you with eyes that could freeze fire. And do you know the weaver? She asks. No, you admit, but I don't think they fear you. That perhaps is what stays her hand, because for Hera, whose entire domain is control of oaths, of unions, of the delicate balance between expectation and order, the realization that something has slipped beyond her reach is more cutting than any insult. She lowers her gaze, and without another word, she leaves the court, her footsteps making no sound on the stone. Later that evening, a letter arrives, not via raven, nor by Hermes' hand, nor through any sanctioned divine method of communication. It appears instead on your desk, unannounced, unfurled, without seal or ribbon, as though it has always been there, and you are only just noticing it now. The script is familiar, not from handwriting, but from tone. A voice you heard once before in a whisper that made the forest lean forward to listen. You still believe this is a story about a girl, but she is not the center. She is the doorway. No name, no explanation. Only the faint scent of sage and rain-soaked parchment. You take the letter to Athena, who reads it once and says nothing for a long while. Then finally, she speaks. Not to you, but to herself. There are 4 relics. You blink. We only know 3. The bolt, she says, the horn, the mask, and the door. You lean in. A literal door? No, she murmurs, but a concept made real. A threshold between myth and unmaking. A point of entry, not for gods, not for mortals, but for something else. Something older, you ask? Athena doesn't answer, but you already know. And still Callis walks. She's seen again in the hills of Arcadia, where she sings not to crowds, but to the empty air. And the stones echo her tune in perfect harmony. In a coastal village, a fisherman claims she crossed the waves barefoot and did not sink. In the city of Corinth, a child draws her face in the dirt. Not her actual face, but the mask. And when asked where she saw it, she only shrugs and says, "It was in my dream." It asked if I remembered my name. Everywhere she goes, people begin to remember things they never knew. Songs that don't belong to their tongues. Stories half told by grandmothers who never told stories. Images that flicker at the corners of their eyes and vanish when they turn their heads. Historians later call it a wave of mythic resonance. Poets call it awakening. The gods call it dangerous. And somewhere between here and the end of things, the horn begins to call. It is not blown, not yet, but it hums, low and distant, like a heartbeat beneath the sea. like the pulse of something vast turning over in its sleep. You hear it first in the bones of Olympus. The stones vibrate, the clouds slow, and Zeus, standing alone beneath a sky that refuses to storm, closes his eyes and whispers, "It's close now." That night, you dream, not of Callies, not of the relics, not even of Olympus, but of a place without shape, without light, where thought folds in on itself like fabric, and a voice, neither male nor female, neither kind nor cruel, asks you simply, when the door opens, "Who will you be?" You do not know how to answer. You wake, and for the first time since the bolt vanished, you're afraid. At first, the signs are dismissed as coincidence, because gods, for all their power, often remain willfully blind to patterns that do not originate from their own intentions. And Olympus has always found comfort in assuming that the divine narrative flows downward, not outward, that mortals only respond and never initiate, that history is something carved by thunder, not whispered by silence, but by the 14th day. Even the most stubborn among them can no longer pretend not to notice the shift in the air, in the world, in the people below, who have begun to act as though something is coming, even if they cannot say what. The revolt begins in a town too small to appear on most maps, nestled between two hills that have no names, known to the locals only by the shape of their shadows at dusk. The town is not known for its warriors or its scholars. It is known for goats and cheese, and a well that always smells faintly of rosemary, no matter the season. But today, the townspeople wake up, look at the sky, and for reasons none of them can quite explain, decide they've had enough. They don't riot, they don't march, they simply stop. Stop farming, stop praying, stop waiting. They gather in the town square and sit, shoulder to shoulder, lips sealed, eyes fixed on the horizon, as though watching for something that no one told them to expect, but all of them understand. A priest attempts to bless them. They do not respond. A merchant tries to sell them trinkets of Apollo. They do not move. When asked why they are doing this, a little girl shrugs and says, "Because the voice said we should be quiet." The same day, in a city far to the west, a statue of Athena, polished daily, draped with olive garlands, revered for centuries, crumbles without warning. Not from lightning, not from sabotage, but from within, as though the marble had simply grown tired of holding its shape. The only thing left intact is the mouth, which remains open in a soundless awe, and the spear, which glows faintly blue for 3 minutes, and then goes dark. In another village, a field of poppies blooms overnight in the shape of a spiral. And in Thebes, a blind poet wakes from a coma and recites, without pause or breath, a poem in a dead language that no one has ever heard, but somehow everyone understands. The poem is about a gate, and a girl, and a mask that never belonged to a face. Back on Olympus, the gods are no longer debating whether this is happening. Now they are arguing about whether they should interfere. Ares is loudest, of course. He has begun sharpening his blades in public again, a habit he usually reserves for show trials and marital negotiations, and insists that the longer they wait, the more the story slips from their grasp. "Strike now," he growls, while the thread is still visible. Cut it, burn it, break the wheel before it spins. Hestia, ever quiet, disagrees. We do not know what we are burning, she says. We do not know what grows in its ashes. Dionysus proposes confusion instead. Flood the mortal world with contradiction, drown the new myth under wine and chaos and laughter until it loses its shape and forgets its path. No one supports the idea, though he still insists on organizing a very distracting festival, just in case. Hera no longer speaks at meetings. Instead, she sends ravens. They return with scraps of prophecy from long-forgotten temples, fragments of prayers offered in the wrong names, echoes of voices that do not belong to any living tongue. One scroll arrives, soaked in seawater and ink, and reads only, "She dreams in directions. She walks in circles. She will arrive where no one built the door." Zeus, however, remains unmoving. He listens, he watches, and he waits, not out of indecision, but because something in him, ancient and instinctive, understands that whatever is coming cannot be outrun, cannot be broken, cannot even be reasoned with. It can only be named. And the name must come from the one who carries it. And Callis, still walking, still carrying the bolt, still cradling the mask, like a question without punctuation, has arrived at the ruins of an old amphitheater that once held 1,000 voices, now crumbling, overgrown with ivy and the kind of silence that settles only where music once lived. She does not perform. She listens. She sits at the center, cross-legged, the mask resting in her lap, and hums. Not a song, not a melody. Just a tone, low and constant, like a note held too long. The wind answers, not in words, but in motion. It swirls gently around her, lifting dust and petals and whispers, forming shapes that do not hold, phrases that do not complete, but meaning that somehow arrives anyway. She opens her eyes and speaks. To no one, to everyone. It is not about power, she says. It is about memory. About the first breath, the first question, the thing before the name. And the earth hums. In Olympus, the lightning altar flickers. For the first time in 2 weeks, the bolt shimmers. Not visibly, not physically, but in essence, a sudden awareness that passes through the halls like a shiver down a long forgotten spine. The gods feel it, and they know. She's not returning it. She is becoming it. You stand at the edge of the observatory again, looking down at the mortal world, and for the first time, you realize the shape she's tracing is not a loop. It's a spiral, moving outward, unending. And if it continues, it won't just reshape Olympus or unseat the gods. It will redefine the idea of story itself. No more heroes, no more villains, no more endings wrapped in thunder. Just possibility, just breath, just silence that speaks. The horn has not yet sounded, but you feel its echo in your chest, in your bones, and in the space behind your name where meaning waits. It is perhaps one of the more unsettling aspects of divine existence, that you can feel the shape of a decision long before anyone speaks it aloud, as though the air thickens with potential outcomes and the marble beneath your feet rearranges itself slightly in anticipation of the next movement in a dance choreographed not by individuals, but by inevitability. And on this 15th morning, as Olympus stretches under a sky that no longer obeys the old schedule of sunrises and golden light, as the mountain trembles ever so faintly with the weight of unspoken decisions, you feel it. The moment about to arrive, the breath held just before the sentence is spoken. The page that turns itself. Zeus has called an assembly. Not a council, not a crisis tribunal, not even one of those endless ceremonial lectures that begin with a wine offering and end with everyone pretending to agree so they can go home early. But something older, something seldom invoked, something the newer gods have only heard of in myth. And the older ones try to forget they remember. He calls it the reckoning of echoes, and every seat is filled, not because of respect or fear, but because this time, no one wants to miss the moment the old world names the shape of the new. You find yourself in the upper gallery, standing against a pillar, etched with the storm lines of long-dead titans. And as the room fills with quiet, the kind that coils gently in the ears and makes even immortals hesitate before clearing their throats, Zeus stands. Not from his throne, but from the floor. He speaks plainly. We are not losing control, he says. We have already lost it. Not a murmur stirs. He continues. The bowl did not fall. It left. And the mask was not stolen. It was summoned. And the horn, wherever it is now, has begun to sing in the bones of the world. Ares scowls, fists clenched, but says nothing. Hera stares into the distance. Apollo folds his hands and closes his eyes. We, Zeus says, are not the only storytellers anymore. And that, more than any threat or warning, settles into the room like a change in pressure before a great wave, bending posture and breath and understanding, because what he's admitting is that the very nature of myth, of meaning, has begun to shift. And the gods, for all their beauty and might and authority, are now part of a chorus instead of a solo. Athena speaks next. Let us be clear, she says, her voice as sharp as the edge of her spear. Callis is not the cause. She's the mirror. She's walking the path laid out long before her birth, following a trail lit by forgotten truths. But the steps she takes, each one echoes louder, and someone or something is listening. She gestures to the map hovering in midair, marked not with landmarks, but with incidents. Strange dreams, inexplicable silences, reverse tides, voices speaking in synchronicity across vast distances. She is awakening more than relics, Athena continues. She is awakening memory. Memory that predates Olympus. Memory that does not care about Olympus. At this, Hades speaks, appearing from the shadows behind his seat. Not late, not early, but exactly when the silence needs him to enter. You forget, he says, that the underworld was built upon forgotten names. I have felt them stir. They do not rise like armies, they rise like questions. He holds up a parchment, blank except for a single word burned into its surface. Why? Not who, Hades says, not where, not how, just why? And somehow, that is more terrifying than any prophecy. Because if the very fabric of divine identity begins to question its own purpose, then power cannot hold. If meaning unthreads itself, then the bolt is no longer a weapon. It is a memory of a weapon, and the hand that once held it becomes a myth inside a myth. You watch as Hermes paces at the back, tossing a coin that does not flip, muttering under his breath. You see Aphrodite staring at her reflection in her goblet, as though trying to determine whether the love in her name still means what it once did. You see Artemis with her head bowed, listening to something you cannot hear, and Demeter quietly fingering a seed that does not sprout. And then just when the silence begins to close in again. A sound not loud, not sudden, but unmistakable reaches the chamber. The horn. Not fully, not yet, but just a note. A single vibration from beyond the wind, from beyond the soil. A note that passes through Olympus, like breath through a reed. Every god feels it. Every wall hums with it. Zeus closes his eyes and says, "It has begun. You are dismissed." Though no one moves for a long time. Eventually, you find yourself outside, walking aimlessly toward the garden of minor gods, where the statues are less heroic, the laurels overgrown, and the air filled with that particular kind of sadness that comes when no one remembers your domain. You sit beside a sculpture of the god of echoes, whose name has been erased by moss and wind, and you realize how thin the boundary truly is between being worshipped and being forgotten. And somewhere beyond Olympus, Callis continues to walk. She's seen crossing a river that no longer reflects the sky. She's heard humming beneath a stone arch that hums back. She is witnessed standing before an abandoned shrine, placing the mask gently on the altar, and whispering a name no one recognizes. And yet, everyone understands. And in her wake, the world changes. Small things, not yet monstrous, not yet permanent, but irreversible. A town's clock tower begins ticking backward, and no one notices. A sleeping child speaks in 3 voices at once. A storm cloud hovers over a desert that has not seen rain in 1,000 years. And in the deepest part of the sea, a shell that has remained sealed since before the naming of time begins to crack. Not with sound, but with intent. Back in the halls of Olympus, the bolt's former resting place glows faintly for the first time in weeks. Not because the bolt is returning, but because the mountain remembers what it felt like to hold it. And still, the mask waits, the horn breathes, and the fourth, the thing no one dares name aloud, waits behind the door. Or perhaps it is the door. Perhaps it has always been. And Callis, she is no longer following the path. She is becoming it. By the 16th day, it is no longer possible to deny that Olympus itself, immense, radiant, supposedly eternal, is changing. Not in the cataclysmic way one might expect from tales of titanomachy or war among gods, with crashing fire and cosmic upheaval, but in slow, precise ways that unsettle more deeply because they refuse to follow the expected patterns of disaster. Like a great marble temple that begins to tilt imperceptibly to one side without cracking, or a familiar melody that adds an extra note where none should be. So slight that only those who have heard it 1,000 times would notice. And even then, they doubt themselves first. You wake in the quiet hour before dawn and realize the stars have redrawn themselves. Not metaphorically, literally. The constellation of the Archer, which has marked the passage of seasons for as long as time has been tracked from above, has shifted its position by 3 degrees south. And what's more, its arrow no longer points toward the rising of spring, but instead directly at the horizon where Callis was last seen. You are not an astronomer, and yet you know that this is not coincidence. You feel it in your breath, in the strange weight of your footsteps, in the way every corridor you walk now feels ever so slightly misaligned, as if Olympus is rebalancing itself in real time around a truth no one yet understands. Athena is already awake, of course. You find her in the central archive, surrounded by stacks of unrolled scrolls, texts in dead languages being retranslated as she mutters to herself, correcting the corrections of the gods who came before her. She barely glances up as you enter, but gestures to a tablet, half covered in red thread and charcoal glyphs. The pattern is evolving, she says without preamble. She's not retracing old myths anymore. She's rewriting them as she moves. You move closer and see the map. No longer a geographic chart, but a lattice of intersecting myth lines, each strand representing a story, a song, a rite. You notice several have been circled. The tale of Echo and the cave that remembers, the forgotten war beneath the river Lethe, the time the moon blinked and the gods looked away. You realize these aren't random. These are the quiet myths, you say aloud, half to yourself. Athena nods, her eyes feverishly scanning lines of script, as though trying to catch up with the spiral that moves faster than even her mind. The ones that never had endings, she murmurs. The stories that faded, not because they were untrue, but because no one kept them warm. She unrolls another parchment and holds it to the candlelight, revealing a faded diagram. 4 symbols arranged in a spiral. One is the bolt. One is the horn. One is the mask. The 4th is blank. Every story needs a shape, she says. A frame to hold it. But what happens when the frame refuses to stay still? You do not answer, because part of you already knows. You leave her there, surrounded by whispers of what once was and what may be again, and walk alone to the southern gardens, which were once the domain of soft breezes and vines that bloomed on command, but which now feel older, rougher, as though the wild beneath the order has begun to show through. The paths are uneven. The flowers bloom in strange constellations. You find a laurel tree whose bark is covered in names carved not by hand, but by thought, some of which seem to shimmer out of focus when you try to read them. And in the center of the garden stands Hestia. She does not look at you. She simply stares at the hearth. It is not lit. It has not been lit in days. You sit beside her in silence for a long time. Eventually she speaks. You know, she says softly, there was a time before fire. You glance at her. She doesn't move. Before warmth, before gathering, before story, she continues. There was only motion, cold and noise and drift. And then someone, not a god, not a name, just someone, rubbed 2 stones together and decided that maybe the world didn't need to be so dark. She turns to you, her expression unreadable. That was the first myth, the one we never wrote down, because it wasn't about gods. It was about choice. You nod. She returns her gaze to the unlit hearth. Callis carries that choice now. The choice to name the world again, or to leave it unnamed. You don't know what to say to that. So you stand, and you leave her there, listening to the silence of the fire that has not yet returned. You travel next to the northern overlook, where Zeus often stands when he believes no one is watching. You expect to find him there, but you don't. Instead, it is Hermes who waits, leaning against a pillar, idly spinning a coin between his fingers, eyes unusually still. Where is he? You ask. Hermes tosses the coin into the air. Gone, he says. No ceremony, no lightning, just left. You blink. What do you mean, gone? I mean, Hermes says he walked into the clouds and didn't turn back. Why? Hermes catches the coin and pockets it. Maybe he realized the story was no longer his to tell. You stand there a long time after Hermes disappears, watching the clouds churn like slow thought soup, and wondering how long it will be before the shape they're forming becomes visible from below. And still, Callis moves. She's seen now walking along the broken rim of an ancient caldera. Her puppet gone, the bowl still slung across her back, like a memory too heavy to lay down. Witnesses say she does not speak anymore, but when she sings, the animals come. The wind slows, the ground grows quiet. Unshepherd claims the air around her shimmers, not with heat, but with meaning, as though the space itself is trying to translate her presence into something it understands. And then one night, she puts on the mask. No warning, no ritual. She simply lifts it to her face and does not remove it. For 3 days, she walks unseen. Not because she is hiding, but because sight no longer defines her. People hear her, feel her. Some report seeing dreams of her, standing in their homes, not threatening, not speaking, just waiting. And on the 3rd day, she's seen again. This time in the Valley of Forgotten Hymns. She stands before a pillar that has not been named since before Olympus, places her palm against it, and says a word that makes the pillar bloom with fire that casts no light. And that is when the horn finally sounds. Not fully, not loudly, but in everything. The trees lean, the oceans pause. Even time seems to hesitate, just for a heartbeat. And in Olympus, the marble cracks, not from force, not from explosion, but from resonance. A deep, ancient hum that shakes loose the dust of 1,000 years of unasked questions. And in the silence that follows, every god hears a voice, not spoken aloud, but felt. The door is open, and none of them know what's on the other side, but they know it is already walking through. You descend the stairs slowly now, not because your legs are weary. After all, fatigue is not something that clings to you the way it does to mortals, but because the very air of Olympus has shifted, thickening like the last moment before a summer storm, like the breath drawn before a confession that will not be taken back. And as you move past pillars that once gleamed with unshakable certainty, now mottled with faint fractures no chisel has made, you can feel it. Not danger, not yet, but inevitability. As if the story you were once a spectator to has tilted, and now you too are being written into it, line by line, breath by breath, without your consent and beyond your comprehension. In the central chamber, where the great loom of fates once stood, now dim, unattended, and gathering cobwebs from corners it never had before. The gods gather again, but this time, no one speaks first. There is no throne at the center, no torch-bearing herald, no grand pronouncement of who will speak and who shall listen. Instead, they stand side by side, some seated, some leaning, all alert but unmoving, as if unsure whether this is a meeting or a memorial, or perhaps something stranger. The first step into a room that has never been built, but which they've always known how to find. And then the mask appears. No one sees her arrive. She's simply there, Callis, standing in the doorway, not as a figure of myth, not as a thief or prophet or pawn or vessel, but as herself, wearing the mask as if she had never been without it. Her shoulders squared, her feet bare, her eyes, or what lie behind the eyes of the mask, not glowing, not flaring, but steady, like candlelight in a tunnel that has no end. She does not bow. She does not speak. She walks forward and places the bolt. Yes, the bolt, still humming faintly, as if surprised to be handled so gently, upon the stone pedestal at the center of the room. And then she steps back and waits. Ares, unable to endure the silence, takes a step forward. "You presume too much," he growls, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "You bring us what is ours and expect applause." Callis does not flinch. She raises one hand, palm out, fingers slightly curved, and speaks, finally, not with voice, but with resonance. "I bring you what was yours. I leave with what is mine." And though the words are few, the weight they carry makes the floor beneath you shiver, because in that moment it becomes clear. The bolt is not hers, but neither is it yours anymore. She has transformed it, not by changing its shape, but by changing its story. It no longer represents control. It represents transition, and that, more than any weapon, is what frightens the gods most. Hera narrows her gaze. "And what of the horn?" she asks. "Where is the fourth?" Callis tilts her head, and suddenly, you hear it. Not from her, not from the room, but from within, a soft note, deep and low and resonant, vibrating not through the air, but through memory itself. Each of you hears something different. A child's lullaby, the first storm you ever summoned. A laugh you had forgotten was yours. And in that shared, overlapping music, Callis replies, not with words, but with understanding. The fourth was never an object. The fourth was listening. It is Hades who speaks next, his voice like falling stones, wrapped in velvet. "So the door," he murmurs, "was never locked." Callis nods, and then slowly she reaches up and removes the mask. Gasps ripple through the room, not because her face is monstrous, not because it is radiant, but because it is unremarkable, soft and human, marked not by divinity or fire or prophecy, but by kindness, quiet and exhaustion that reaches down to the bones of the earth. She looks ordinary, and somehow that is the most extraordinary thing any of you have ever seen, because it means that this story, this spiral, this myth remade, does not need thrones or flames or titles to be true. It only needs someone willing to carry it. She steps away from the pedestal and begins to walk, not back, not away, but through the chamber, through the wall, through Olympus itself, not vanishing, not ascending, but changing, like a breath that has chosen not to exhale, but to become wind. And as she passes each god, something stirs. Poseidon sees the tides reverse for half a second and smiles, without knowing why. Demeter watches a seed in her palm split open and begin to sprout in the shape of a spiral. Apollo hums a tune he does not remember composing, but which brings tears to his eyes. And Artemis, standing still as the moon above a sleeping forest, simply nods, once, because she, perhaps more than the rest, understands what it means to walk alone and return changed. When Callis disappears beyond the far wall, which no longer seems like a wall at all, but rather a curtain of possibility, fluttering in the shape of stone. No one follows, because no one can, because this part of the story was not meant for them. Not yet. Instead, they turn slowly toward the bolt, still humming, still resting, still waiting. And in the silence that follows, you feel something settle. Not certainty, not finality, but permission. Permission to wonder, to ask, to let go of the tale you thought you knew and listen, really listen, to the tale that is still unfolding. Outside Olympus, the sky ripples with color, not like a sunset, more like a memory being rewritten. In the mortal world, people begin to dream again. Not of heroes and monsters, but of doorways, of spiral staircases that lead to names they've never heard but somehow recognize. Of voices that do not command but invite. And somewhere, far from marble halls and golden thrones, a woman walks into a field and lays down her mask. It dissolves into the grass like dew, and when she walks on, she does so unburdened, but never alone, because now the stories walk with her, because now the stories are themselves walking. And you, who once stood apart, who watched from above, who believed in the safety of myth, as something to be held and never questioned, you realize you are part of it now. And that is both the most terrifying and most beautiful truth of all. You descend the stairs slowly now, not because your legs are weary. After all, fatigue is not something that clings to you the way it does to mortals, but because the very air of Olympus has shifted, thickening like the last moment before a summer storm, like the breath drawn before a confession that will not be taken back. And as you move past pillars that once gleamed with unshakable certainty, now mottled with faint fractures no chisel has made, you can feel it. Not danger, not yet, but inevitability. As if the story you were once a spectator to has tilted, and now you too are being written into it, line by line, breath by breath, without your consent and beyond your comprehension. In the central chamber, where the great loom of fates once stood, now dim, unattended, and gathering cobwebs from corners it never had before. The gods gather again. But this time, no one speaks first. There is no throne at the center, no torch-bearing herald, no grand pronouncement of who will speak and who shall listen. Instead, they stand side by side, some seated, some leaning, all alert but unmoving, as if unsure whether this is a meeting or a memorial, or perhaps something stranger. The first step into a room that has never been built, but which they've always known how to find. And then the mask appears. No one sees her arrive. She's simply there. Callis, standing in the doorway, not as a figure of myth, not as a thief or prophet or pawn or vessel, but as herself, wearing the mask as if she had never been without it. Her shoulders squared, her feet bare, her eyes, or what lie behind the eyes of the mask, not glowing, not flaring, but steady, like candlelight in a tunnel that has no end. She does not bow. She does not speak. She walks forward and places the bolt. Yes, the bolt, still humming faintly, as if surprised to be handled so gently, upon the stone pedestal at the center of the room. And then she steps back and waits. Ares, unable to endure the silence, takes a step forward. "You presume too much," he growls, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "You bring us what is ours and expect applause? Callis does not flinch. She raises one hand, palm out, fingers slightly curved, and speaks finally, not with voice, but with resonance. I bring you what was yours. I leave with what is mine. And though the words are few, the weight they carry makes the floor beneath you shiver, because in that moment, it becomes clear. The bolt is not hers, but neither is it yours anymore. She has transformed it, not by changing its shape, but by changing its story. It no longer represents control. It represents transition. And that, more than any weapon, is what frightens the gods most. Hera narrows her gaze. And what of the horn? She asks. Where is the fourth? Callis tilts her head, and suddenly, you hear it. Not from her, not from the room, but from within, a soft note. Deep and low and resonant, vibrating not through the air, but through memory itself. Each of you hears something different, a child's lullaby. The first storm you ever summoned, a laugh you had forgotten was yours. And in that shared, overlapping music, Callis replies, not with words, but with understanding. The fourth was never an object. The fourth was listening. It is Hades who speaks next, his voice like falling stones wrapped in velvet. So the door, he murmurs, was never locked. Callis nods, and then slowly, she reaches up and removes the mask. Gasps ripple through the room. Not because her face is monstrous, not because it is radiant, but because it is unremarkable, soft and human, marked not by divinity or fire or prophecy, but by kindness, quiet, and exhaustion that reaches down to the bones of the earth. She looks ordinary, and somehow that is the most extraordinary thing any of you have ever seen. Because it means that this story, this spiral, this myth remade, does not need thrones or flames or titles to be true. It only needs someone willing to carry it. She steps away from the pedestal and begins to walk. Not back, not away, but through the chamber, through the wall, through Olympus itself, not vanishing, not ascending, but changing, like a breath that has chosen not to exhale, but to become wind. And as she passes each god, something stirs. Poseidon sees the tides reverse for half a second and smiles without knowing why. Demeter watches a seed in her palm split open and begin to sprout in the shape of a spiral. Apollo hums a tune he does not remember composing, but which brings tears to his eyes. And Artemis, standing still as the moon above a sleeping forest, simply nods. Once, because she, perhaps more than the rest, understands what it means to walk alone and return changed. When Callis disappears beyond the far wall, which no longer seems like a wall at all, but rather a curtain of possibility, fluttering in the shape of stone, no one follows, because no one can, because this part of the story was not meant for them. Not yet. Instead, they turn slowly toward the bolt, still humming, still resting, still waiting. And in the silence that follows, you feel something settle. Not certainty, not finality, but permission. Permission to wonder, to ask, to let go of the tale you thought you knew and listen, really listen, to the tale that is still unfolding. Outside Olympus, the sky ripples with color, not like a sunset, more like a memory being rewritten. In the mortal world, people begin to dream again, not of heroes and monsters, but of doorways, of spiral staircases that lead to names they've never heard, but somehow recognize, of voices that do not command, but invite. And somewhere, far from marble halls and golden thrones, a woman walks into a field and lays down her mask. It dissolves into the grass like dew. And when she walks on, she does so unburdened, but never alone, because now the stories walk with her. Because now the stories are themselves walking. And you who once stood apart, who watched from above, who believed in the safety of myth as something to be held and never questioned, you realize you are part of it now. And that is both the most terrifying and most beautiful truth of all. In the days that follow, not marked by celestial alignment or declarations from high pedestals, but by subtle, barely perceptible changes that accumulate like dust in corners no one thought to check. You begin to notice that Olympus has grown quieter, not in the sense of abandonment or loss, but in the way a house feels different after the last guest has left, and the air begins to hum with the memory of voices that are no longer echoing, voices that once filled the marble rooms with certainty and debate and ambition, and now, in their absence, leave behind a kind of stillness that is not emptiness, but rather the echo of transformation that is still unfolding in every cracked tile and half-forgotten corridor. You rise early now, not because you must, but because the sunrise has taken on new shapes. Light curving where it used to cut straight across. Shadows forming outlines of symbols that have yet to be deciphered. The sky itself learning how to stretch differently. And each morning feels like a tentative first draft of a new chapter. The cosmos has begun to write with fingers made of mist and meaning. You walk past the amphitheater, once a place of oracles and disputes, where gods challenged one another in riddles and thunder and posturing grandeur. But today, it is filled not with shouting but with birds, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, forming strange spirals in the air above the stone seats, as if mimicking the sacred patterns of stories rewritten from scratch, as if even the animals have begun to adapt to a mythos that now favors listening over ruling. There are scrolls missing from the library, not stolen, not lost, simply gone, as if they were never needed in the first place, or perhaps as if they had fulfilled their purpose and dissolved into air, their knowledge absorbed by the roots of thought rather than preserved in ink, and where those scrolls once sat, flowers grow. Tiny ones at first, barely noticeable, but now they bloom in full, even without sunlight, curling into shapes that resemble letters in alphabets, never spoken aloud. You find yourself drawn back to the same places. Athena's study, Hestia's hearth, the southern balcony. But each visit feels different now, as if the spaces themselves have become dynamic, reinterpreting your presence not as visitor or witness, but as participant in something that cannot be named without diluting its essence. Athena is no longer reading. She is writing, not on scrolls, but in the dust of the floor, in the condensation on the windows, in the breath she exhales onto glass and metal and memory. You watch her trace a spiral with her fingertip, then erase it with a smile that carries none of the exhaustion of recent days. Only curiosity, the kind that used to belong to children before they learned that questions were meant to be answered rather than explored. We've been treating myths like architecture, she says softly without turning. But maybe they're more like weather. Patterns we can't control, only prepare for. And then she laughs. Not the cold, precise laugh of a strategist, but the soft one that slips out when something obvious suddenly becomes beautiful. Elsewhere, Hermes teaches silence. Not tricks, not travel, not messages coded in bird flight, but silence. He sits with mortals in strange corners of the earth, in subway stations, under bridges, beside vending machines that sell memory instead of sugar. And he teaches them how to wait without expectation, how to listen to the way silence holds more stories than noise ever could. In the deepest sanctum of the underworld, Hades begins planting gardens, not of asphodel or poppy, not of things that sleep, but of odd little seedlings sent by children who do not know his name and yet draw his face with smiles. The plants grow in shadows, but they shimmer faintly, and their roots hum songs that even he admits he does not understand. Though he listens anyway, night after night, hand resting gently on the soil as though it might speak in time, and somewhere, always somewhere else, always on the edge of vision, Callis walks. Not hidden, but not quite present, seen in puddles, glimpsed in reflections, humming songs that the wind steals before they can be remembered. Children see her most, not always directly, but in stories they tell that no adult taught them, in games that mimic rituals no longer practiced, in dreams where she holds no lightning bolt, wears no mask, but smiles and points toward doors that don't yet exist and says, "There, that way." If you're not too afraid, you begin to realize something quietly terrifying. That Callis is not a character who has completed her arc. She is a beginning, a living hypothesis in a world that used to worship conclusions. And now no one, not even the gods, can be sure what comes next, because the myth is not paused. It is alive, and it is listening. Even the winds whisper differently now, curling around statues that were once only decorative and now seem to lean slightly forward, as if eavesdropping, echoing through abandoned shrines where the dust itself rises to form brief phrases in languages long extinct, carrying with them the scent of things that have never grown in Olympus before. Cumin, ink, the sea foam of unknown shores. One afternoon, a mortal boy climbs Olympus. No fanfare, no divine invitation. He simply walks, barefoot and determined, carrying nothing but a satchel of cracked coins and a worn book of myths that no longer matches the world he sees. And when he reaches the gates, which are no longer golden, but translucent and pulsing like the membrane of a starling's egg, he does not ask for entry. He simply places a pebble at the threshold, bows once and turns away. When you examine the pebble later, you see that it is etched with a spiral, not carved, grown from within. It is unclear whether it is a message, an offering, or a seed. But you plant it anyway, and wait. Each evening now, the stars behave differently. Not in a chaotic way, not in a threatening way, but in a curious way, as though the sky is learning to speak a new dialect of pattern. Constellations drift a few degrees each night, their figures melting from warriors and beasts into ambiguous shapes. A dancer, mid-twirl, a question mark held aloft by wings, a spiral turning inward rather than outward. And each night, someone somewhere dreams of Callis, not with reverence, but with recognition, as if she's no longer a figure of reverent fear, but of familiar invitation. Come walk this way, the dreams seem to say. Come rewrite the rules. Come listen to a story that does not end. And in Olympus, where once the thunder ruled, now there is only the hum, a low, steady sound. Not mechanical, not magical, not even musical exactly, but true. As if the world itself has found a frequency it had long forgotten. And now that someone, just one someone, has sung it into being again, it cannot be unheard. And as you sit at the edge of a crumbling balcony, feet dangling over clouds that no longer conceal but reveal, you understand at last what the horn was for. Not to summon war, not to crown a king, but to wake the myth, to remind it that it does not belong to those who shout the loudest, but to those who dare to whisper, to those who walk, to those who change. And so you breathe, deep, long, slow. The story has not ended. It has only paused to listen. It is neither dawn nor dusk when it begins. Not exactly a time of day, so much as a moment between measurements. A sliver in the fabric of now where everything seems to breathe just a little more softly, as though the world itself is exhaling after a long-held breath. And you, still walking among the quiet corridors of Olympus, feel that breath pass through you like a breeze scented not with flowers or incense, but with the pale sweetness of clarity, the soft certainty that something vast and gentle has unfolded, and that even if you cannot name it, you are standing inside it now, like stepping into the echo of a lullaby, remembered from before memory began. No horn sounds this time. No flash of lightning cracks the sky. There is only a flicker, a momentary shimmer across the marble walls, as though the light were blinking, winking even. And for a heartbeat, the halls of Olympus appear almost translucent, like the bones of something ancient and kind, like the ribcage of a sleeping leviathan, whose heart is made of myth, and who dreams stories into existence every time the stars align just right. Zeus does not return, or perhaps he never truly left, because now no one speaks of the lightning bolt as a weapon or a scepter or even a symbol. They speak of it as a place, a threshold, a lens through which the story was once refracted, bent and echoed and amplified until it became sharp enough to divide gods from mortals, questions from answers, beginnings from endings. But now, after all this, it sits quietly in the chamber of winds, humming with a sound so faint that only those who have stopped chasing power can hear it clearly. You walk the outer rim of Olympus, where the wild time grows stubborn between cracks in the stone, and bees circle in loops that mirror the galaxies spinning far beyond this mountaintop. And you stop at the edge, looking down, not to gaze upon the mortals below with superiority or pity, but to feel the gentle gravity of their lives, the tug of every prayer and sigh and laugh that rises upward, whether it is believed or not. Because belief, like light, travels farther than its source ever imagined. And you see it then, the spiral, not just in stories or sky or the patterns traced in tea leaves and cracked bowls. You see it in the movement of people, in the way villages have rebuilt their festivals, not around gods, but around questions, in the way temples have grown quiet, not abandoned, but listening, in the way children now play at being the girl with the bolt, not as a hero, but as a wanderer, a whisperer, a kind of patient mischief that does not seek to conquer but to ask. Even the animals move differently. Owls hoot in threes, cats stare too long into puddles, dogs tilt their heads when the wind shifts, as if it carries messages they haven't quite decoded, but still understand instinctively, deep in their bones, like howling at the moon, without knowing why, but feeling it matters. In the upper halls, Hestia lights no fire today. She simply sits at the hearth, which remains cold, and smiles at the silence. The warmth is already in them. She murmurs to no one in particular. They just needed to stop mistaking flame for permission. And you, still pacing the boundary between myth and memory, realize that the gods have not disappeared. They have simply stepped back, not in exile, but in trust. Because when Callis took the bolt, she did not end Olympus. She rephrased it, rewrote the first sentence so that the rest of the story could meander, wander, spiral into new shapes that do not fit scrolls or statues, but instead live in motion, in the ripple of pond water, disturbed by a single toe, dipped in without ceremony, without fear. There are no more oracles now, at least not in the old sense, but dreams have grown louder, and strangers often finish each other's sentences without ever having met. And sometimes, when someone says, "I feel like I've lived this before," they are not being poetic. They are tuning in, briefly, to the new rhythm beneath the world. A rhythm born not from thunder, but from choice. Not from law, but from listening. You pass the place where Callis stood. Not walked, not fought, not preached, but simply stood. And it is not marked by shrine or statue or plaque, only by the feeling that something real happened here. Something soft and seismic, like a heartbeat becoming a drumbeat, and then fading again into a quiet you can only hear when you stop naming it. Even Apollo has changed. He still plays, still sings, but now his notes do not command. They wonder. And Artemis, his sister, no longer hunts as if she must conquer the wild. She walks among it, unnoticed, unseen, trailing a finger along the edge of bark and thorn and dew. The myths are not gone. They are simply loosening, stretching, becoming clothes we can grow into instead of cages we inherited. You look at the sky one more time, and it looks back. Not with eyes, not with judgment, but with recognition. A kind of nod from something older than all of this. And you feel it, quietly, unmistakably. The story is yours now, to tell, to listen, to forget and rediscover and mispronounce and rewrite, and still have it mean something true. Because the bolt was never about who held it. It was about what you do with the story once it's passed through your hands. And so you step back, let the spiral unfold, let the myth exhale, let the world dream. And now as the story settles into the softness of its own spiral, let your breath mirror the rhythm of the tale you've just followed, in through the nose, gently, without rush, and out through the mouth, like a cloud rising from a warm mountain spring just before dawn, letting the weight of gods and myths dissolve gently into the fabric of the night around you, until all that remains is a hush, a slow and curling hush that wraps itself around your shoulders, like a blanket woven from memory and moonlight. You are still here, still held in the cradle of something old and vast, yet no longer heavy. The names, Zeus, Hermes, Callis, Athena, fade softly now, not vanishing but relaxing into the background, like the soft brush of wind through tall grass, or the echo of laughter down a marble corridor, long after everyone has left the room, and the gods themselves, no longer looming, no longer loud, drift into the texture of your thoughts, like fireflies, blinking in the folds of sleep. The bold, the sky, the questions, they're all still spinning, but more slowly now, as if waiting for you to catch up in a dream you're about to enter, where Olympus is made of soft clay and the clouds are made of linen, and even time walks barefoot so as not to wake you. Let your eyes drift, let your jaw relax. There is nothing more to hold on to here. Only the steady, spiral quiet of a story that ends by becoming part of you. And as your breath slows, and your thoughts begin to blur at the edges, like ink soaked into old parchment, let the last voice you hear tonight be your own, whispering back to the myth. I remember now. I understand. I rest.